Our clerk today is Ms. Sheila Gurry. Today's Governance and Priorities Committee meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter and Council Procedure Bylaw 2018 number 7272. As the province is now in phase 3 of the reopening plan, question period has now been reinstated for those in attendance for agenda items only. The question period sign-up sheet is on the table by the double doors to my left. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name on the agenda item on the sheet. At the start of question period, the chair will call those who have signed up to the podium to address council. The first item on the agenda is introduction of late items. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Chair. For late items today, agenda item 6C1, Community Amenity Contribution Policy, the addition of a delegation from Mr. Darren Moss. And for agenda item 6D2, South Nanaimo Mobility, adding the following delegations. Number 1, Dale Porter, and number 2, Mike Parker, Chairperson, Chase River Community Association. And that's it, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Gurry. I would look for a motion for the adoption of the agenda. Moved Mayor Krogh, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Thank you. Now for a motion for the adoption of minutes as circulated. Councillor Sherrill, seconded Councillor Armstrong. Oh, that's going to be the first of many. Seconded by Councillor Martman. All those in favor? Thank you. Agenda planning, Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Chair. So starting on page 12 of your agenda through to page 17 outlines the upcoming topics for your GPC meetings for the remainder of the year. There are only 2 more GPC meetings left after this one in 2021, and that is November 22nd and December the 13th. There are a lot of topics, and all of them might not be able to come forward in order to provide the proper attention to some of these topics, and or possibly a special meeting may need to be called in the interim, but council's also working through their budget this time of year as well. So that is on page 12 is the upcoming topics, and the calendar is on page 14 of your original agenda. So any questions that council may have regarding any of these upcoming topics, now would be the time.
Council? Okay, nothing. Thank you. So reports, we have nothing under governance and management, nothing under environmental responsibility, and we're on to economic health with the community amenity contribution. Introduced by Mr. Lindsay.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair, Council. I'm certainly happy to be back in front of you this afternoon to continue the discussion about community contributions and a community amenity contribution policy. I'm going to turn it over almost immediately here to Ms. Brinkman, who's been the team lead on this project, and I know you'll recall from her last presentation. So she's going to spend some time going over where we've been since we were last in front of the committee, and with the recommendations that have come out of what we've heard in that time. So I'd also note that we have Mr. Mulholland, who was the consultant who assisted in this project, is going to be participating or available online in case there's any questions following the presentation. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Brinkman. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you, Chair. So just as a quick recap of the CAC, and I'll use the term CAC for Community Amenity Contribution. So a recap of the project thus far. So CACs are negotiated and secured at the time of a rezoning application or land use covenant amendment application. And the current CAC rates were established in 2010, and a new CAC policy is needed to encourage greater contributions as the city grows. So we started the review of the CAC rates in early 2020, and one of the first steps was to hire economist Jerry Mulholland of Rollo & Associates, who provided analysis and recommendations for new CAC rates. Next, we conducted consultation with the Nanaimo development community, and in March 2021, we presented a new CAC policy to the GPC committee for consideration. And from there, we conducted consultation with the neighborhood associations and again with the Nanaimo development community and presented a revised CAC policy to the GPC in July 2021. At the July meeting, staff were directed to further conduct consultation with Nanaimo development community and to provide clarity regarding a CAC rate based on floor area. So today I will report on the recent consultation and present the revised CAC rates that are being proposed. So throughout the process, we have made many adjustments to the policy in response to consultation. So the more recent changes since July are, and can move it to the next slide, please. Oh, I can do that, right. Okay, thank you. Oops. There we go. So after discussions, the Nanaimo Development Group agreed that basing the rate on the total number of units or total floor area in development project is appropriate. And they also recommended using a rate based on floor area for multifamily dwellings. So staff agreed with this approach. One benefit of basing the multifamily rate on floor area is that smaller multifamily units are not penalized in that situation. And for single family and townhouse dwellings, the CAC policy remains as a per unit rate. So the CAC policy is beneficial because it provides certainty for the development community, but it is a blunt tool that is appropriate for most development situations. But there are unique situations where the CAC rate may not be appropriate for the total number of units or total floor area. And in these situations, negotiation is always possible. And to assist with that, what we've added and made more clear is that a third-party financial analysis can be used. And so you'll see this new language in the updated policy. And so lastly, the Nanaimo Development Group agreed with the recommended rate increase for January 1st, 2022, but recommended a more gradual increase in the CAC rates for 2023 and 2024. And staff concurred with their proposed rates for the next 3 years, and these are integrated in the new policy, but in addition proposed a rate increase for 2025 to reach the levels that were recommended by Rollo and Associates.
Ms. Brinkman, we have a question from Councillor Armstrong.
Sure. Thank you. So we're talking about private residential dwellings as well as townhouses and condos, I'm assuming, are in that as well. What happens with the commercial space? Is that exempt from that rate, or is it does it make part of the rate?
Yeah, so what is hasn't changed, and what we're proposing is no change to the commercial and industrial CAC rates. So you'll see, so you'll see on the screen for commercial and industrial that the rate is $34 per meter square of gross floor area, and that's actually been the rate since 2010. And in consultation with Jerry Mulholland, he recommended no change to that rate.
So on that then, so if the commercial's on the bottom floors like we have on Third, the bottom floors would be rated at the 34, and then the top floors would go at whatever the
correct
we deem for apartments. Or thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. So just briefly, you will notice, so on this slide is the proposed rates. And so for the year 2022, 2023, and 2024, those are the rates as were recommended by the Nanaimo Development Group. And actually the 2022 rate is also the same as what was recommended by Rollo and Associates. There was agreement there. For 2023 and 2024, there's being proposed a more gradual increase, and that was in the request from the development community. And then 2025 is reaching the rates that were recommended by Jerry Mulholland. So that would mean that we're reaching that rate 1 year later than was originally proposed in July. So that's the change. So that's my short presentation, and we're hoping that we've hit it this time, and the goal really is to have meaningful community amenity contributions to allow for more public amenities in the city as it grows. So, and while addressing the interests of the Nanaimo development community, so finding that right balance. And so we're here to answer questions. Jerry Mulholland is on the line as well.
Thank you, Ms. Brinkman. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. I think you hit it right the first time, and we broke it the second time, and then now you're getting it right again. So, and I appreciate the work that's gone into this. My question is regarding the two differences between MFD and commercial industrial rates. When will we be able to view if this is causing a problem as we're getting more industrial than residential? Like, when would we be able to see that? And in the same matter, if we are going to square footage for multifamily, how will we be able to make sure that still we're building rental units that are for larger families, 2, 3 bedrooms, that sort of thing, when it's considerably, I think, more lucrative to build smaller units and get rent for each one of them as opposed to one rent for a larger area? How we'll be able to see that, and what we'll be able to do if we want to change things? What would be a recommendation?
I suppose at any time, council can request a review of, it's a policy, like this is a CAC policy, so it's not a bylaw. It is a policy that can be reviewed, it can be negotiated for each project, certainly. I don't know if Jerry Mulholland has a thought about the other part of your question with regard to unit size, and I think the thing to remember is we only negotiate for CACs at the time of a rezoning application. So for development permits and, you know, CACs are not negotiated at that time. It's just at rezonings. So,
Mr. Mulholland, I saw your camera come on. Do you have anything to add?
Yes. So through the chair, with regard to the commercial and industrial, I was going to echo the comments that Ms. Brinkman made regarding the fact that it's really only on situations when rezonings are required in order to get the commercial and or industrial use, which was part of the reason why we said just let the numbers run, because you're not generally getting a ton of applications in rezoning non-commercial or non-industrial lands to those uses exclusively. Insofar as monitoring if there's a shift of land going more towards industrial rather than residential, that's something that you observe through your permit applications and through rezoning applications to see whether there is an issue or problem with it. I personally wouldn't be overly concerned. I think residential tends to swing heavier hammer in terms of the money that's available to go to purchase land and bid on it over commercial and industrial. And as to the second part, what was the question regarding?
I guess it was, I'm trying to get as much money out of the consultants or advice of the consultants I can, instead of having to come back to you a couple of years from now, is in the event that we decide that too many small units are being built retail, how can we change things to encourage more larger family rental units?
So that's not a question that we were tasked with answering in this particular set of analyses. It is a question that many municipalities are struggling with, though, at this point in time. With most municipalities, what they're doing is similarly that the CAC is a policy. Many municipalities are introducing policies around requiring certain percentages of multifamily friendly units in new development, whether those be rental or whether they be just strata, requiring a certain percentage of 3-bedroom units or 2-bedroom units or things like that. So again, it's difficult to embed in a bylaw, but certainly you can put policy in place to try and encourage those sorts of things.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner. Councillor Turley?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure who can answer this, but I'll ask it anyway. I'm just wondering if it's a fair assumption that by approving a gradual increase as opposed to a more steep increase in the CACs is to help it align more time-wise with the amount of time that it takes to actually get a project through the processes. In other words, at the beginning of the process, the developer is assuming my costs are going to be this or that, and then all of a sudden we throw something in like this. By doing it more gradually, it is less of an impact on the development. I don't know if that's a fair assumption or not.
So I can answer that, and I didn't clarify in my presentation that the CAC rate would apply at the time of the rezoning application. So we did need to pick pick a date for when the rate would apply. So if we receive the rezoning application January 15th, 2022, then the rate that would be secured is what you see in that column for January 1st, 2022. So even if the project was actually built 2 years later, the rate that the city would, or the amenity, yeah, exactly, thank you, would collect would be what was set in 2022.
Thank you.
Okay. No further questions. I believe we have a delegation. Oh, Mr. Rudolph?
Just to answer Councillor Bonner's question about review, one of the things I think, forget the specifics of this particular policy. For the development community, certainty is important, and having some stability in terms of policy sets is valuable to them. And so I would suggest that, you know, allow this policy to, it's technically possible to reopen a policy review or tweak it, but you'd probably be advised to say this is, you know, at least until this policy has been implemented fully, you shouldn't probably promise to revisit it unless there's some urgency to do that. I think the development community, it takes years to plan for and develop developments, and they do pro formas on those types of things, and it's important for them to know what the policy is. They may not necessarily agree with all of it, but at least if they know what it is, they would appreciate knowing there is some stability to that for at least a period of time.
Thank you, Mr. Rudolph. Do we have Mr. Moss? Oh, there you are. Hi. You're welcome to come to the podium for your presentation.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for providing me with the time to chat this over. I can do this? Okay, I wasn't sure.
Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me the time to speak. I'll be very brief. Much as you've heard, I think that we're, as a Nanaimo Development Group, we're very appreciative of you guys sending it back for one more consultation. We felt that the last round of discussions was very collaborative. Having Jerry Mulholland in the room in the discussion was really useful, so we could hear the complexity, we could hear the concerns. Everyone got to hear what we were thinking, and we feel that the proposal for option one in front of you today is a good balanced compromise. I'm sure both sides would adjust little things moving forward, but I think we're all at the point we agree there's been enough chat about this and that it's supportable from all sides, so we would encourage you to move forward with option one as presented. And just to highlight how much we found that last conversation very collaborative, it was useful to have the consultant, the city staff, and the Nanaimo Development Group in the same room to hear all the same topics. It really provided a better backdrop for a good compromise and collaboration. So as we move forward, there's lots of other things that'll come up over the years. We just really found that to be very useful. So here to answer any questions, and more than anything else, just to provide our support for option one.
Thank you, Mr. Moss. Any questions for the delegation? Mayor Krogh.
Thank you very much, Chair, and through you to the delegation. I will describe you as a sophisticated developer today. There's your compliment. You're in touch with your confreres and presumably others up and down the island. Do you sense that there'll be, quote unquote, any significant negative reaction to what's being proposed here today from the development community? Appreciating that, look, much of the development occurs as a result of local builders, contractors, developers doing the work. But I'm thinking of, if you will, the larger development community that looks at Vancouver Island now and is proposing mass developments, bringing capital from other places. And I'm just curious to know what your sense of things is.
That's a wonderful topic.
No pressure.
I'll answer the first part first. I think that anytime we do an 800% increase in a rate, there's going to be some backlash. There's just no way around that. The hope of the Nanaimo Development Group is that we can communicate out to our membership, which is 65 to 70 developers and consultants, so that we can explain the work done to date. We don't represent all developers by any means, but hopefully we can smooth that transition a little bit. But that kind of a change will certainly garner some commentary, I'm sure. As far as local developers versus developers from elsewhere with more money, I suggest it's a complicated topic in that there's lots of funds out there with very deep bank accounts looking for small rates of return that make it difficult for local developers to play the same game. And so the kind of conversations we've had with staff on this are carrying that light forward, in that if we can make these policies so that they are as flexible as possible, it allows someone to get in that doesn't have the bankroll of a very large developer. So it just creates more opportunity for different levels of developers to play in a community. But it's a very complex, challenging question.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Just following up on what Mayor Krogh said. So if you didn't have the big bankroll like some developers do, would that maybe encourage you to maybe do some more work around non-market? Like so we could get some more affordable in because you wouldn't be have the same issues as those that are doing market?
It's challenging because I think every developer hits from two angles. There's developers that are strictly financially pro forma driven, and then there's developers that like to have a goal for the development as well as the pro forma. And I think that exists at both levels of development. There's very large players who have that same social context, and there's small players that don't and small players that do. So I think the best way to get to Councillor Bonner's question, if you're trying as a council to incent development in a certain direction, I'm sure staff can share this with you, but there's lots of tools that are allowed at a provincial level to incent specific developments, whether it's property tax or DCCs or extra density. Those are really creative tools that perhaps can be explored in the future to make sure development is aligning with where you want it to go as best you can. But I think the deeper bankroll piece just means you can be more patient, because you're not paying interest on the money as you wait through a multi-year process, or you don't have to justify to a bank why you get the money. So it's just a different patience game.
Thank you, Mr. Moss.
Yeah.
And stay there, Councillor Bonner.
Thank you very much, Chair. We've had this conversation. We've been talking about these community amenity contributions for a very long time now, and appreciate you sticking with us on this. In the overall price of building, say, a development, commercial and residential, not unlike you've completed on street next to City Hall there, how much percentage is the GACs compared to the overall project? And am I putting too much in faith in these things to encourage development in a certain direction when it's really not? It's something you would just write off on a piece of paper and just carry on.
Probably the best way to answer this, and maybe Mr. Mulholland can reach at this, but I understand the basis of the current rate when we get to the full rate to be an attempt to get to 50% of the land lift associated with a rezoning or a land use covenant amendment. And so it's definitely not insignificant. But really what development is about is death by 1,000 cuts, right? So one piece on its own, I don't know of any one piece that really will kill the development. Is when you add up all the different layers of complexity between code changes and bylaw changes and environmental standards, and there's just a bunch of different pieces. And when you add them all up, it becomes quite complex and very, very significant. For this actual CAC policy, Ms. Brinkman described very well that it doesn't apply to a lot of projects yet. It's only if you're coming into a project where the existing zoning doesn't suffice your needs and you want to go for a rezoning. And so in Nanaimo, we might be getting to the point where that's going to become more frequent, but traditionally that hasn't been a tool that's been used a lot in the last 4 to 5 years. So it probably hasn't been an impediment. But as you start to look for developers that are going to be a little more creative, push the boundaries a little bit more, that piece then comes into play a little more frequently. So I think every one of these steps, it's important to have a thoughtful discussion and make sure we're using them for the right reasons and that they don't just pile up and snowball on us a little bit.
Thank you.
Okay, no more questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon.
Mr. Lindsay?
Madam Chair, can I just go back to, and I just want to make sure council's understands that staff are taking steps on this topic of family housing, and in fact, your affordable housing strategy says in it that we should have a family-friendly policy. So that's one of the things that staff are currently working on, and we'll come back to you and talk about, what are the carrots and sticks to get there. I do think, and I think Mr. Moss mentioned it, I do think it's important to note, you get on a average year, probably about 25 to 30 rezoning applications. On a really busy year, maybe 50. You have 20,000, 23,000 properties in the city. So this rate only applies to a very, very, very small fraction of projects that actually come across your desk. So it's not that it's not important. and I do agree with the speaker, it's how you layer all of these things together, but it would only apply to those applications coming forward for rezoning. So not the majority of what we're seeing or the majority of what's coming to council for approval.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lindsay. Councillor Brown.
Madam Chair, if appropriate, I'd like to move the recommendation.
Absolutely. Seconded by Councillor Martman. Any conversation or discussion? Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say thank you to staff and the development community for sitting down and working through this policy, and I'm happy where it landed, so thanks for the good work.
Councillor Turley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just making the assumption we're voting on option 1, not 2.
The recommended, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Before we vote then, I will add, as I was reviewing the report, I was reminded the amount of work that went into this, staff, the consultant, as well as the Nanaimo Development Group. So I just want to express my gratitude to everyone involved. So I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay. Over to community wellness and livability. We have pedestrian infrastructure prioritization tool to be introduced by Mr. Sims.
Thanks, Madam Chair and Council. Good afternoon. Just really briefly, I'll turn this over to Mr. Rose and our consultant, Gavin Davidson. Just to refresh, this is really part of the Reimagine Nanaimo active transportation portion. In May, you may recall that we were in front of Council, in front of the GPC, to talk about the active transportation component. And at that time, we talked a little bit about the importance of having some sort of a tool, a more transparent tool, so people understood how pedestrian amenities were prioritized. And that's what we're back in front of you today, just to introduce this. The intent is really about, we have a tool that's GIS based, so it's a little bit more obvious and transparent and translatable. There's a lot of complexity and a lot of technicality in here, but hopefully we'll walk you through that and help you understand. So as the report notes, the intent is really to trial the tool for the next several months and then incorporate it into the city plan or Reimagine Nanaimo when we get there. I'll pass it over to Mr. Rose.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. As noted, we're here to provide an update on this process. Mr. Davidson will go through quite a thorough presentation on what we've done and what's emerging from that. As Mr. Sims noted, this is part of the anticipated to be rolled into the Reimagine components. And so we are circling back just to highlight the connected components, not only connected in the context of Reimagine, but how this connects back to it. And we will be planning to run this process through until the spring, when we can present the findings and the recommendations and represent those to council to ensure that they are in fact meeting the expectations to move forward. So at this point, I'd like to hand the mic over to Mr. Davidson to take us through the material.
Thank you, Jamie, and Mayor and Council. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you. Next slide, please. So when we presented to you back in May, we gave you an overview of the process used to improve infrastructure, pedestrian-related infrastructure, and we highlighted these 6 steps. Since then, we've been focused specifically on identification and prioritization of pedestrian improvements, and we're here to provide you with an update on that aspect of our work. Next slide. I'll go through a bit of background. I'll update you on the process and the process that we're using to prioritize improvements. We'll talk about some of the outstanding issues and the next steps that we need to take in the work. Next slide. Over the last number of years, Nanaimo has made a number of efforts to improve sidewalks and crossings to make them more safe and comfortable for pedestrians. And those steps that you've taken have had quite an impact. So pedestrian-related collisions in 2016, there were 39 pedestrian collisions that occurred during that year. And by 2020, that number of collisions had dropped to 15. However, the process to identify and prioritize intersections for improvements is still confusing to the public and to council. And there's a number of questions that we're hoping to address through an improved process. Next slide. The process that Nanaimo currently uses looks at the total risks and generator score. So this looks at factors that influence the number of trips taken by pedestrians and typical risks that they face when they're crossing intersections. And it puts these factors together and it comes up with a total score. And those that receive a higher score are given a higher priority, and those a lower score, a lower priority. Next slide. During the process that we used initially when we reported to you in May, we came up with a number of recommendations. We wanted to make the process more transparent, to use data that was available and easily compared, and to develop a process that was amenable to reactive and proactive planning. That is, it could be used to respond to concerns that were being raised by the public, but also as a proactive tool to assist you in your planning as you move forward. Next slide. So we looked at case studies from around North America, and we came across some work that was being done by Bellingham. They were using a process that was actually quite similar to Nanaimo's process. However, the factors that they were looking at, the data that they were using was easily attainable and easy to understand. And so we decided to use their process as a starting point in updating the process that Nanaimo uses. Next slide. So we identified a number of risk factors and pedestrian trip generating factors for which there was data that was readily available and which could be assessed through the tool, the GIS-based tool that we've developed. I'll now go through a series of slides where we look at each one of these factors, and I'll show you how each of them is being scored and what constitutes a high score and a low score and how that plays out throughout the city of Nanaimo. Next. So one of the factors that we're looking at here is walk score, and walk score measures the proximity relative to nearby amenities for each crosswalk. And when we look at this, we find that those crosswalks that have a higher walk score are closer to various amenities, and they receive a higher score. Those that are farther from amenities tend to receive a lower score. And we'll look at the next slide here, and you'll see how that plays out both within the downtown and throughout the entire city. So you see a lot of high scores in the mobility hubs and also within the town center. Next slide. We also looked at speed. And roads with higher speed limits are given a higher score because they're considered as a higher risk, and those with lower speed limits are given a lower score. Next slide. And you can see how this plays out within a particular intersection or intersections here as we've shown. And you can see that the model that we're using is quite sensitive, so it's able to recognize speeds for a right-hand slip lane and also for the main thoroughfare, and categorizes those speed limits and the scores that are given accordingly. Next slide. And here you can see how this plays out at intersections with crosswalks throughout the city and also in the downtown core. Next. We looked at volumes of traffic, and we drew data from the Digital Road Atlas. and also, of course, from Nanaimo's data from the crosswalk points. And roads that have a higher volume are considered a higher risk, and those with lower volumes are considered a lower risk. And we did this based on the roadway classification. So highways and arterials receive high scores, and collectors and local streets receive lower scores. Next. This gives you a sense of the scores that we've calculated within the downtown and throughout the city. Next slide. We also looked at collisions that have taken place involving vulnerable road users. We used the data that's available from ICBC. We looked at collisions that had occurred over the last 5 years. And obviously in locations where there's a higher number of collisions involving vulnerable road users, those locations are given a higher score. And where there's fewer or no collisions, they're given a lower score.
Excuse me, Mr. Davidson, I'm going to interrupt you for a question from Councillor Armstrong.
Thank
No
you.
worries.
When you're talking about the collision involving pedestrians, are you also looking at whether the pedestrian was deemed at fault or not, or does that come into play? Like I'm referring
No,
to the ones
in our assessments, it doesn't come into play. We're just looking specifically at the whether or not there was a collision that took place. And I think you'll see that it does indeed, when we look at the next slide here, you'll see that the locations with higher scores definitely do reflect the fact that these collisions are intuitively locations where, or that tend to be higher risk. So all of where you see the X's there, those are where collisions have taken place. And in some cases, you'll see that there's no dot associated with those are locations where there's no crosswalk marked or at a mid-block crossing.
And just to follow up on that, when you're talking about the crashes, do you also get the statistics from the fire department and the RCMP? Because many accidents they go to are not reported to ICBC.
Yeah, now that's a good point. And I do think that we could update this at some stage to include collisions that are reported by others at hospitals and by the police and fire and ambulance. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Mr. Sims, would you like to weigh in?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just really briefly, this tool is using the data that's available, readily available, and it's attention directing. So if you want to start to think about whether the ped was wearing dark clothing or if the driver was speeding, that detail is revealed if there's further investigation into a particular location. But in general, this provides that global attention directing kind of approach.
Thank you.
Yeah. Next slide, please. We looked at transit score, and this, in this case, we look at crosswalks that are located near high traffic transit stops. So where there's a high number of ons and offs, low boarding and alighting from buses, those locations receive a higher score. And those intersections that are not near a transit stop or are near a transit stop that has a low level of activity, those receive lower scores. Next slide. So this shows the outcome of that assessment both in the downtown area and throughout the entire community. Next slide. We also looked at mobility hubs, and crosswalks that are within or near mobility hubs will be given a higher priority, and those that are further from mobility hubs receive a lower score. Next slide. So this shows you the outcome for downtown area and throughout the entire community. And the mobility hubs, the 7 mobility hubs that exist are marked there, and those crosswalks that are in close proximity or within those mobility hubs are given a higher score. Next slide. We also did what we call an equity analysis, and this involved looking at crosswalks that are in proximity to lower income parts of the city where a higher percentage of residents are lower income. And next slide gives you a sense of how that plays out within the downtown and then throughout the entire community. There you see the areas and crosswalks that are in proximity to lower income neighborhoods. Next slide. We also looked at crossing distance. So longer crossings are scored higher as they pose a higher risk. Next slide.
Mr. Davidson, I'm going to interrupt you again for a question from Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Chair. To Mr. Davidson, I'm curious how income plays a part in the scoring. Is there any reason for that? I'm sure there is.
Well, I'm sorry?
I say I'm sure there is. I just don't know what it is.
Well, no, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for raising the question. Those who are lower income tend to rely on walking more frequently than those who are of higher income. And that's one of the major reasons why we tend to focus on economic equity as part of the assessment.
Thank you.
And one more question from Councillor Armstrong.
Just to follow up on that, because the last 4 fatals all occurred in the North End, which is considered high income. So I guess I struggle with that we're using that as a goal when actually, I think the last 6 were all in the North End, which is considered high end. So I struggle with the fact that we're using that as a what do you call a word, factor.
Well, it is one of many factors. And so this is, again, it's attention grabbing and it's directional. And I think that you'll see when we look at the overall scores that things come together and produce pretty logical results as you look at the overall results. And even if we are to separate out equity, the factors of the lower income areas tend to be around roadways that are of higher speed and higher risk. So there's a number of factors and reasons why that should be included in the overall mix.
Thank you. That was a good point. Thank you.
So here, as we're looking at distance for particular intersections, you'll see that the crossings that are longer produce higher scores and those that are shorter crossings produce lower scores. And then you see the overall scores that we found looking at crosswalks throughout the city. Next slide. We also look at proximity to schools. Those crosswalks that are in close proximity to a school receive a higher score, and those that are in further away from schools receive lower scores. Next slide, please. So this gives you a sense of those crosswalks that are in close proximity to a given school. In situations where their crosswalks are in close proximity to 2 schools, they receive an even higher score. And those are the areas you see marked in red. Next slide. So in this slide, we are essentially showing you the total sum score, looking at all of the different factors weighted together. And they're all weighted evenly. The lowest score is 8.5 out of 90 for a particular crossing in the city. And the highest score that we found was 81 out of 90. So there's quite a degree of variability across Nanaimo. Next slide. So these show you the particular scores that we found at intersections throughout the downtown, and you can see that Comox and Wallace and Highway number 1 and Wallace received higher scores relative to other intersections throughout the downtown. And again, it's a fairly intuitive outcome. Next slide. So there's a number of benefits of using a pedestrian crossing prioritization tool. It allows staff to quickly and accurately assess whether a crossing location should be prioritized for pedestrian improvements. It supports a more transparent process so that you can report your assessments more regularly and that you can communicate those more clearly to the public. The model can be updated regularly as new data becomes available. It allows staff to respond to the public inquiries more quickly and with more confidence, and it allows, as I said earlier, for more proactive and reactive responses. Next slide. There's a number of issues that we've identified through the work that we've done to date. So right now, the code currently allows us to score those crossings that are marked, but it doesn't provide a score where crosswalk lines don't exist. In this particular example, you see that that one crossing there is scored, and what this reflects is that in fact the aerial photographs that we're using are not entirely up to date. So that one crossing has had some pedestrian crosswalk marked on it, and it is now graded as such. However, there's the one leg of this intersection that doesn't have a score, and that's because there's no crossing marked there with crosswalks physically, but also because we haven't marked that in the GIS database. And in fact, to come up with a score for that leg, all we need to do is to mark it in the GIS database. So next slide. Here we've marked that leg of the intersection, and we've graded it along with the rest of the crossings. And we see that it's got the highest score, and that's because it's the longest crossing within this intersection, and as such scores higher than the other legs. And I should point out here that this model now takes just over 5 minutes to run. So you can add a leg into of an intersection, run the model within 5 minutes, and you'll be able to report out on a score for that leg of the intersection. So this is a very efficient tool for staff to be using. Next slide. The other issue here that we've noted is that pedestrian or bicycle collisions at intersections without any crossing treatment are being highlighted here. And this suggests the need for network improvements, which are unlikely to be revealed by running the model. However, by looking at the maps as they emerge, you can see locations where we need to consider possible treatments based on the data that's available. Next slide. So this image demonstrates how the same intersection can have a variety of results depending upon the inputs. In this case, the difference in the scores that we're seeing is based on the crossing distance and the posted speed. And so those factors allow us to look at the situation in a fairly fine-grained manner and come up with scores that vary even in close proximity to one another. Next slide. In some cases, there are multi-stage crosswalks that are drawn as one line. So the crossing widths may be overstated, as in this situation where we have a roundabout and crossings that have a refuge area halfway across the intersection. Now, this simply highlights the considerations that are not coded or that are coded inconsistently within the database may lead to faulty or incomplete assessments. And it just means that staff need to scrutinize things quite closely. Sorry, next slide. No worries there. Yeah. So this gives you a sense of the overall scoring for all seven, the entire city, using our scoring system. And what we've done here is we've added more colors so you get a better sense of the variability of scores throughout the city. And in this case, we use 7 mobility hubs, and we've given equal weighting to all of the 9 factors that we're considering. And what you see is that the high priority intersections are identified within all of the mobility hubs located throughout the city. Next slide.
Mr. Davidson, I have a question from Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Chair. Through to Mr. Davidson. My question is, how do infill projects affect the scoring? I'm thinking in particular of 3rd Street, where there's a number of multifamily developments happening there. Is that fall under the volume, which I assumed, I wrote a note here, was more to do with proximity to destinations? Did I miss something?
It wouldn't affect the volume score, but it may have implications for other factors, and that may show up over time. It would depend on if it were close to a mobility hub. There's many different factors, of course, of the 9 that are we're looking at here that you'd need to take into account to consider the impacts. It could have an impact on economic equity. It could have an impact on transit ridership. So those are some of the aspects that could be influenced as development changes in a particular area.
Thank you.
Mr. Davidson, we have another question from Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Chair. I was just curious, I think ultimately, protecting against collisions and fatalities is, a fundamental goal for all of this. I'm just curious if taking the collision and fatalities out and then running the model, if it was predictive of where those collisions and fatalities were happening at all, just to kind of as a test.
Well, this is interesting because that's essentially what we've done here, and the maps that I'm going to show you now. So it's a fitting question and well timed because in this map here, what we've done is we've increased the emphasis on risk. So you go back to the slide before, and that shows you an equal weighting between risk factors and trip generation factors. Next slide. This focuses more heavily on risk factors, and we're putting 80% of the emphasis on risk factors. And you see that the number of locations that are identified is reduced quite significantly in terms of the number that are high priority, but we still see that they're generally occurring around those mobility hubs, centered on the mobility hubs throughout the community. Next slide. In this slide, we did just as you've asked, and we emphasized high generators, those factors where there's high trip generators. And we see that the priorities are focused around those mobility hubs throughout the community still, but even more strongly. Next slide. So in this slide, what we did is rather than consider all 7 mobility hubs, we just considered the downtown mobility hub. And still you see that the other mobility hubs tend to light up a wee bit with higher priority intersections, but less so because that, and the downtown is emphasized even more strongly. So that gives you a sense of how the model reacts to different approaches, weighting of these trip generation factors and high weighting of the risk factors. Next slide. So we have a few questions here for council, and you may have other questions that you might want to ask before I get into the next steps. That's our final slide. But before going on to that, we thought we'd open it up here and see if there are questions. Wondering if you have further questions about the prioritization tool and its potential challenges and benefits. If you have a preference for weighting of risk and trip generation factors, and whether or not you have any thoughts on how the tool might be used to support improved pedestrian planning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davidson. I have a question from Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Mr. Davidson. I'm looking through the priorities and the inputs into this tool, and I don't seem to see anything that shows pedestrian traffic. So that's actually people walking on the streets. It doesn't show pedestrian traffic, when it's taking place, what times of the day, that sort of thing. And also the question, before I get into a few other of these, is does the tool take in posted speed limits or actual speed limits? Because we find that people around here tend to drive more than the posted speed limit.
No, these are excellent questions, and it does not calculate pedestrian traffic that's actually occurring. As I said, it looks more at the trip generators, and there's a few reasons for this. One is that data would be very challenging to collect and to update continuously around the city. It'd be challenging to do that and to keep it updated and accurate. But also, it may very well be that even though there is a high potential for pedestrian trips in a particular area because there's lots of amenities, there's schools, there's transit stops that people want to use, but maybe those roadway crossings are so dangerous that people are reluctant to get out and to use the pedestrian network. So in some ways, it's probably a good idea to just continue to focus on these factors that are likely to influence pedestrian traffic in order to accurately identify where we need to place improved crossings. With regards to speeding, this is an issue that's come up quite a bit, and we agree again that it would be ideal to be able to identify the actual speeds that are occurring. And again, the challenge is that we don't have accurate data for all of the roadways throughout Nanaimo. But I would certainly encourage Nanaimo to continue to try and collect that data so that you would be able to use it in this tool. Now, having said that, once you have identified a location as being of a high priority generally, I would certainly encourage staff to go out and to measure the actual speeds in order to take the next step in designing appropriate crossing treatments in order to make that intersection more safer.
If I may carry on, yeah, I'm looking at, thank you for that. We actually may be in the position to calculate pedestrian traffic and speeds because we recently moved up to LED lights which have the capacity to have monitors installed on them that allow us to monitor that type of traffic. So I'm hoping that will be, so that leads to my next question is, in the event that we go down that road, literally, will we be able to add that data into this tool to make it more accurate?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. You would be able to include that in the tool. And I think that would make it even more powerful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I go to one of your examples? I think it's on page 15. It's a priority that you've given fairly high to the intersection at Comox and Prudhoe, I believe. It's kind of hard to see on the map because it's really blurry. But I think that's the page. It has a fairly high thing, but all the times I've been through that area on my bike, I rarely see pedestrians, even though it is close to a playground, a park. But the buildings and commercial areas in that area don't necessarily tend to attract people who would walk to them. They're more, they're more like there's a music store and there's a bakery that just does wholesale and stuff like that. So it would be a destination, people driving there. So it looks to me like it's sort of a false positive. And so my concern here is that if it's a false positive, but it now is larger in terms of our priority, are we going to see staff spending time on that particular intersection to only find out that it's a false positive and there's not enough traffic there, which goes back to the original question in terms of pedestrian traffic?
Well, this is it's an important point to make that this model that we're recommending is effective in highlighting possible concerns, but that it is important that staff are able to scrutinize those results and to use their professional judgment to be able to assess whether or not indeed a treatment is warranted at a particular intersection. Mm-hmm. So you're absolutely correct that staff needs to look closely at the results that are coming out of this model to be able to ascertain whether or not indeed there is a high priority at any given or particular location.
If indulge me one more, thank you. The walk score that we get from the real estate board, in your estimation, is that an accurate representation? To give you an example, I live on Northfield Road. A number of amenities are only 2 blocks from where I live, but everybody who lives on the other side of the laneway that I'm on can't get to those amenities unless they drive, because they have to walk completely all the way around because there's no access through that area. So an entire neighborhood that I'm only like 4 minutes away from the grocery store are 15 to 20 minutes away when they're right across the laneway. So does this walkability score have you had an opportunity to flesh it out, test it out, or are we just taking whatever real estate board's given us?
Well, we have looked at the scores that we've seen, and we've looked at a number of different locations. And from what I can see, it does a pretty darn good job of assessing the proximity to various amenities and even whether or not those are accessible. Now, that's my assessment looking at the locations that we've assessed using the walk score. But again, like, I would absolutely recommend that staff continue to scrutinize this factor and all of the criteria that we're looking at to make sure that the scores that they're receiving are accurate. And that's part of the reason why we wanted to go through each one by step and show them to you so that you could get a general idea of, yeah, okay, that looks as though it's reasonable. But I mean, there's thousands of crossings that we're talking about here, right? Potentially, if we draw GIS lines across all of the unmarked crossings. And so it's important that staff scrutinizes all of the data that's going in and what's coming out after the assessment is finished to make sure that the results are as accurate as they can be.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Thank you. When we're looking at the preference for weighting of risk and chip generation factors, and one of the things that you look at is injury and or fatality, do we also take into account the time of day that is happening? Because perhaps it should be that, maybe lighting's not good at that spot, or perhaps we need the flashing light. I myself am a huge fan of those little green things that we see on Fitzwilliam Street by Selby, because for me, that really catches my eye actually more than probably a flashing crosswalk does. But that was a concern I had because sometimes some of these accidents are occurring like at 2 or 3 in the morning. And so do we take that into effect when we're looking at that?
Yeah, and that really is the next step down the line. So you've identified that an intersection is a high priority for treatment. And then the next step that staff needs to take is to understand, what collisions are occurring and why are those collisions occurring, or what other risks are there that they're seeing if there is no collisions that are occurring, what other factors play into the potential for this to be a risk, and what steps might they take to improve the situation, to mitigate some of those risks that exist. And that assessment, it needs to be broad. And from what I'm seeing, and the different types of treatments that staff have been using, it's pretty clear that you've got a talented bunch there that are focused on a variety of concerns and considerations in the design of those crossings.
Yeah, thank you. That was going to go to my last point. I think that there's been really lots of really good movement towards improving our infrastructure, especially for walking and pedestrians, to staff. So I just wanted to thank them. I know that a lot of times once the concerns have been brought forward and staff looks at them and realizes they're legitimate concerns, there's been immediate action. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, just with the weighting, for myself, I think like weighting the risk greater is important in terms of for fatalities and collision, and then just a question. I think ultimately, and maybe this discussion will come further down, but I think a lot of this tool is one for us to be proactive in identifying key areas for intervention. Another important thing is for this to be open and for transparency just to the public around expectations of, this is our list of intersections, and these are our top priorities, and this is why, and this is where sort of things sit in terms of what we're addressing first, so that expectations can be tempered and understood. With that is, for example, on crosswalks that maybe there's 1 or 2 collisions or more that for some reason they're not ranking high. Are we ever at risk of being in that situation? And then if for whatever reason the model's not catching up because for some reason it's just this weird corner or there's some weird pattern there in the community that's happening that the model just doesn't pick up, it will be picked up obviously in that one weighting part that has the collision and fatalities in it. But I guess sometimes we get ourselves in a situation where there's, I don't know if there's a reluctance or where it's a consideration that, if we go out and put, a crossing right there and there's not really any backing other than people happen to get hit there, that we're at some type of liability for not have taken action before. Does this model help us get us out of that situation? Or do we just have to wait? If there's a couple fatalities or if there's a couple accidents at an intersection, that automatically bumps it to the top of our algorithm and list, and we just act on and make that intersection as safe as possible.
Well, there's a lot of factors that play into traffic safety. Just through the comments that we've heard here today, sometimes it can be pedestrians at fault, sometimes it's the drivers that are at fault, and there's various different factors, people speeding and lots of people trying to cross at particular locations. There's many factors to take into account through the assessment. And obviously the number of collisions that are occurring is one very important factor that we do need to take into account. I think that I would tend to agree with you that the risk factors do need to be given high consideration. And we'll be looking at that. Like, I don't know that we can dive into this immediately and make a judgment as to what sort of weighting is most appropriate for Nanaimo. I think that there's value in experimenting and in assessing this tool over time and coming back to council and presenting the results to you and comparing different ways of weighting these factors in order to gain consensus on what is the best way for Nanaimo to weight these factors and to take action in order to improve safety.
Mr. Sims, do you have something to add?
Thank you. Really, I just want to emphasize a number of the questions are really around how predictive, or this is not necessarily predictive. It's just looking at some very, let's say factual data and providing some prioritization. It doesn't negate the need for human intervention and human thinking behind it. you know, there's always going to be that litmus test of the crosswalk that looks higher or lower than we would have expected, and you may dive into why that is. We do have in your agenda package, and I hope in the slideshow, just an example of 10 or 15 sample intersections where we applied different, staff applied different weightings on each of these criteria, and it just shows how the priority shifts. Again, this is really just indicative of, you know, it's a tool to give us, you know, to point us in the right direction and make sure that we're testing it. As Mr. Davidson noted, there's a lot of thinking that then needs to go in. Why is this? Or if we have a fatality at a particular crosswalk that isn't on our radar, why is that? And that's the stuff that we need to unearth. But at least this provides something that's clear, consistent, hopefully transparent to the public, and gets us sniffing in the right direction.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. Davidson, do you have any slides left for us?
We do, yeah. We have one more slide just to talk about the next steps. And thank you very much, Mayor and Council, for your questions. Greatly appreciated. In terms of the next steps in our process, we're going to update the model so that it can be used to assess the relative priority for pedestrian improvements at all crossing locations throughout Nanaimo, and not simply at those where there's a marked crossing. We'll adjust the weighting of the criteria and update and confirm those outputs for you and present those to you over time. We will provide documentation of our methods. We're going to train staff to run and check the model and provide guidance for updating and improving the model. And we'll also support staff and council in using the model to guide planning and decision making. So really, we're very close here to being finished in the work that we need to do as consultants. We are then going to hand this over to Nanaimo staff, and they will have the skill and the expertise to be able to run this model regularly and to update it so that it can be used in an ongoing fashion to assess the need for priorities, to address priorities throughout the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davidson. Councillor Bonner.
Just one more question, if I may. Who else is using this model throughout Canada?
Well, as I mentioned, there's a number of communities that use similar approaches, as I mentioned, Bellingham, but what we've basically done is we've taken a methodology that looks at various different communities throughout North America, and we've tailored it to suit Nanaimo's needs and the data that you have that's available. So I think the answer is that there's a number of communities that use something similar, but none that I'm aware of that use something that's exactly like this. And to be able to put all of this data together to be able to assess in a very rapid fashion like this is something that's fairly innovative. I'm not aware of too many other communities that are using such an approach. And really, it's a testament to the data that Nanaimo has collected and the manner in which you've built your GIS database to allow you to be able to undertake this kind of an assessment. So again, really, kudos to the staff for the hard work that they've done to collect the data and to make sure that they can use it in this manner.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Davidson, on my slide deck, I have a few more slides, but it looks maybe central to City of Nanaimo.
Those slides are just ancillary, and really we were just going to draw upon some of those slides if needed and for further discussion. But our slideshow is done, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Mr. Sims?
Madam Chair, I think there is some value certainly in looking at the last slide that's in the package, just to sort of talk through some of the questions. And I know Mr. Rose can provide a bit of an update. There's been some questions from not only the public, but council members as well as to what the status of certain projects are, and we'd happy to address that. Maybe look at this first, and then at the end we can look at the current projects. And if I could just ask if Mr. Davidson's head could be moved to the lower left of the screen, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
And is Mr. Rose walking us through this, or Mr. Davidson?
Nope.
It's up to you, Jamie, if you'd like to dive in here, or if you'd like me to talk through a bit.
I'll sit back and let you
Right
talk
out.
to the
Sure.
finish line.
No worries. I'll give you a quick summary here of what we're seeing. So what we did is we identified 15 intersections that had been assessed fully through your own tool that you developed, and we compared it against the model that we've created, and the different weighting factors that we took into account. So on the far right-hand side, you see how these 15 intersections are assessed using Nanaimo's current model. And then on the left-hand column, you see what the equal weighting score is. So all of the factors, the 9 factors that we're taking into account, have been given an equal weighting, and those are the scores that result. With the 80% risk being taken into account for the 9 different factors that we identified, that's the next column over, and 80% weighting to the trip generation factors, that's the next column over. And so all of the 3 that are developed under our model are fairly consistent, with some slight shifts in those in the order of the intersections and their scoring. And our model is quite a bit different than Nanaimo's current model, and that just reflects the fact that the factors that we're considering are slightly different than those factors that Nanaimo currently considers.
Mr. Rose, anything to add? It's okay if it's no.
I think I'd just like to emphasize that the work that Mr. Davidson has done with his team to create this platform for us is very dynamic, and we can update as and when. But really, it's a tool that's intended to attention grab and to draw staff's awareness to certain areas or certain corridors, which will then enable us to more efficiently focus in on that, extract more data, or go and do more explicit site investigations to identify what may or may not be needed, and to, I guess, look back to Councillor Bonner's reference to the intersection of Comox and Prideaux. That's an intersection that may not have a great deal of active pedestrian demand, but it is I believe it's a 4-lane crossing on a major road. And, it is signalized right now, so maybe our treatments would be focused more towards adaptations of the signal to support pedestrian mobility. But it really is sort of this layered approach of taking a cut citywide, then focusing in, gathering more data, refining the process, and then continuing to move forward to help promote walkability within our community. So,
thank you very much for that additional commentary. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you. I'm glad we got to this slide. And it's quite interesting to see how it does vary from Nanaimo's current model. For the life of me, I've not been able to find Lawler and 11th. It looks like it's the exit from the Country Grocer onto Lawler, and there's no intersection there to speak of, and no crosswalk.
Through the chair, you nailed it. It is the entrance into the Country Grocer, but there is a future vision to cross through from Lawler to Junction to create a connection through there. And so that was an intersection and crossing that came to our attention through the creation of the Malaspina Gardens development. Mm-hmm. And so we've been been keeping an eye on that.
Okay. The other question I had is regarding Hammond Bay and Williamson. And when I'm looking at the map, I can see why the city may have put that at a higher priority, because it's a crosswalk that is painted, but it's on a strip of road that people probably just burn down pretty darn fast. And so I can see the design, but in this particular, the equal weighted model, or even the 80% risk, it's literally half of what the city's model has things. So I look at that particular, and I'm not an engineer, I just looked at it on maps and I said, okay, I actually can't see a lot of pedestrians in this particular area, because I can't see why anybody would walk across that crosswalk. Why, can you tell me why it's so low on the equal weight compared to the NIMO's current model?
Through the chair, I think that it's important to look at the fact that this is a sampling, but in general, the point factors are lower through the new matrix or system. I think that particular location had a higher measured speed, so I think that comes back to the acknowledgement that when we are drawn to a particular crossing, we do need to more heavily scrutinize it to understand what the specifics are. So it may be categorized as a 50-kilometer-per-hour roadway, but ground truthing it may reveal that it's a much higher speed, and so that's where we would have to come back and do a more detailed assessment of different locations.
I guess my question here then is what number triggers for staff to start looking at an intersection? Because I would think 3.8 out of 38 out of 90 doesn't.
Through the chair, so I think that when we look at the number of locations that are in front of us to assess, it will dictate what that threshold looks like, because we need to start working through from our highest priorities down. And so we may find that some of the locations, as I said, are signalized, and there may be some sort of software background adjustments that may help address the situation, or we may have to dig deeper. And so, we may be able to take 15 or 20 locations right off the top and say, well, these are quick solutions, and so we don't need a huge investment of capital funds, where there are others where the solutions may be quite costly. And so I'm a little reluctant to sort of pin down a number and say, well, anything under X won't get a look, because we do need to go through that process of looking at all of them.
So is it your plan to actually just start at the top and work your way down, which is fine with me?
At this point, yes.
Okay.
So.
Fine.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner. Councillor Mortman.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Councillor Bonner, and thank you for this report and this tool that I do believe will help us in our planning. Speaking at the top of the list now, Bruce and Albion, and I believe we can speak a little bit to this now. There are those in the neighborhood that are very concerned with this crossing, very pedestrian heavy, anywhere on Bruce and 5th and around that area with the University Mall. And I'm wondering, because I've heard that Bruce and Albion might not be just as simple as putting up some lights. So I'm wondering if we can speak to this, please.
Through the chair. That's pretty much correct. So earlier this year, we had 2 rounds of discussions to allocate the $1 million in pedestrian funding for the year. And so we were able to take a number of locations, identify them, and allocate the funds, begin the process to start implementing them. Some of them are quite straightforward in that we can just sort of plunk the flashers in and carry on. Bruce and Albion, as we did get into our more in-depth review of it, we found that there were things that we thought would bring a lot more benefit to that particular location. So not only are we adding flashers, but we are addressing some lighting issues, and we're also introducing a raised crosswalk to manage speed. So It is a more time-intensive process, but it is a much more elaborate enhancement.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong?
No, thank you, Councillor Mark. Ask my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, Councillor Thorpe?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll take the opportunity through you. My apologies for arriving late due to another meeting. I just wanted to say that I did read this report carefully and with a great deal of interest, because Council often hears concerns from citizens in various locations around the city about what they see as an important priority for pedestrian safety and intersections and so on. I think it's really important that the public is aware that whatever tool we're using, or combination of tools, that there is impartial criteria that staff is applying and is well aware of a number of intersections or crossings that warrant close attention. This should not be a political decision when council is asked to prioritize one location over others. This should be based on, as I said, impartial criteria. So I'm really pleased that we're examining possibly changing our model or using a different tool to fairly assess and then compare and prioritize where we want to spend our money in regards to pedestrian safety. So I appreciate the report. I appreciate the work that went into it. And again, my apologies for arriving late. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. Councillor Bonner?
Thank you. Councillor Thorpe inspired me to ask another question. Is in terms of the transparency of what we're trying to do here, is how will the public be able to see this other than taking a red pill and jumping into the matrix? Is there a way to get into this? Like, how will they be able to see these results?
We would be able to record the specific score for each crossing that we've identified in the model that we're measuring. And we can report out on all of those. And staff would be able to identify their priorities based on, using that as a starting point. I should point out, of course, that there will be other factors that they will take into an account. So it might not always be the very highest that will warrant treatments, but it will help to make this process more objective and transparent.
Okay, thank you.
So, if I can just elaborate a little bit on Mr. Davidson's comments. So the first, I suppose, priority of this process was to create a system that was actually understandable. We have had a system in place for years, but it is very, very complex. It's very data intensive and can become very time consuming for staff to execute. And so moving forward to this process and providing council with the opportunity to provide some guidance on the weighting factors and how we can do this preliminary review of a citywide system is sort of that progression. And at some point we do aspire to get this into a forward-facing platform for the community to actually be able to see. And so there will be information going out so the community can see this is the weighting factors, these are the processes we use, and at first blush this is what the system looks like, so we can continue to sort of feedback where these requests are coming from, how they land, and continue to communicate out what we're doing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rose. Any further questions from council? Oh, Councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, I do. One more thing I just thought about when we were talking about other factors to look at to Keenan. I'm just wondering if we should look at truck routes. And what comes to mind for me, and I would be looking like a street like Halliburton or Industrial, because we have the big trucks on there whose stopping distance takes much longer to stop. So that is something I personally would like to see put into that because of their ability to stop on a dime versus a car. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. I have a few questions. So this is building on Councillor Bonner's, but at some point, will we be able to, if a resident contacts us and says they have no engagement with the city prior to, and they say, Victorian Esplanade is a really difficult intersection, can you know, how do I get improvements there? Will staff or council then be able to take our list and say, well, based on our criteria, this is where it sits in the queue, and with the caveat that, you know, every intersection is assessed holistically?
Through the chair, short answer is yes. Long answer is this is an evolving process, and so we're just we want to make sure and get the foundation laid that we can all get on board with before we start pushing that information out. But ideally, we would have a forward-facing map or webpage or app that shares that information.
Fantastic, thank you. And finally, I note in the purpose of our report is to overview the tool, but then also to provide input. And I know Councillor Geselbrock showed preference for having more risk than trip generation. Did you receive enough information, and this is for the consultant as well, to update what you have to in order to get this back to us?
Mr. Rose, would you like to respond?
Sure. Through the chair, I was just going to acknowledge that you know, we've heard a lot today, and I think that we've got some information to go back and we can discuss it and refine as needed, and then as we noted in the report, we'll sort of process through the next couple of months, prioritizing some locations, and then come up with a way to present that information forward and give council some opportunity to solidify our answer and formalize the process.
Great. Thank you. Any further comments or questions from council? Great. Thank you very much. Our next presentation is going to be introduced by Mr. Sims regarding the South Nanaimo Mobility Study.
Thank you, Chair. Just really, this is certainly a hot topic. Council is well aware of a number of concerns that have been brought forward by the community, and this is really in response to the motion that Councillor Brown, Councillor Armstrong brought forward to look at what it would take to undertake a mobility study in the south end of town. So I think staff really wanted to respond to, we could respond with a fairly simple, this is what a mobility study looks like, but there's also been a number of efforts underway, and we thought it was appropriate to sort of lay it out in a factual manner. The information that staff has or has at their fingertips, along with some of the work that's been underway with the Neighborhood Association, with the Ministry of Transportation as well. So I think this is, like the previous presentation and Mr. Rose mentioned, this is an evolving process. Certainly putting this information out there for council to workshop and discuss and understand today, especially in light of the ongoing potential land use changes as a result of the Sandstone development and the Reimagine Nanaimo process. So one informs the other, or one, you know, the land use informs mobility, informs land use. So certainly Mr. Rose has a presentation, and it's really about discussion and some brainstorming. We'll probably not solve all of the issues today, but it's really to help provide context and awareness for council.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. And if I may, council, just kind of generally as we're doing, put your name on the list if you have a question. Once Mr. Rose is done presenting, we'll invite the delegations up, and if we could save our questions after that, we'll ask questions of the delegation as they're in front of us. But if there's further conversation, then we'll save that for after the delegations have left the podium. Okay, Mr. Rose, over to you.
Thank you very much. Through the chair. This presentation is brought forward in response to the motion from the September 21st council meeting regarding exploring a South Nanaimo mobility study. I think this is very timely, and I appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion. I have a short slideshow where we can go through some of the background, current conditions, planned work, potential work, and some opportunities to move forward. So to start off, when I'm going to be discussing South Nanaimo, I do want to be clear, I'm referring specifically to the area to the west of the Trans-Canada Highway and to the south of the Parkway. That's our current sort of focus area. This currently represents about 1,300 homes, or about 3 to 4% of the population for Nanaimo. This particular neighborhood started transitioning from greenfield agricultural to single-family residential in the 70s, about 50 years ago. The progress out there has continued steadily and is continuing to infill. And through that time, the road network has developed in keeping with sort of a 70s and 80s model. We've referred to it as conventional in previous discussions. It's quite focused on a single point of connection to the main network. And the land, as I say, has developed as single family. There are not a whole lot of daily services or service providers in the community. There's little to no employment or retail, grocery, or medical services. So this combination of land use and road system require everybody to exit the community and enter the community for all of their daily activities, which creates a focal point of traffic loading on the Cranberry Extension Trans-Canada Highway system of roads and intersections. Through this 50-year period, we have seen a succession of policy documents and studies. Your reports have quite a lengthy list. I think some of the key ones are the OCP, the Sandstone Master Plan, the Transportation Master Plan, and the Reimagine OCP and the amendment to the Sandstone Master Plan that are currently underway. Before we get into explicit discussions around this specific area, I thought it would be really helpful to highlight for council how all of this fits in the general context of the city. And so there's 3 key points that I want to make sure that I leave you with today. One is that for the most part, our traffic signals do operate reasonably well. We have a few that are lagging, but we are working on those. Regardless of how well a signal operates, most, if not all, have a weak movement. It's over demand, under capacity. In the peak periods, it does tend to fall below what the community typically would like to see for the level of service. The third point is that a lot of our intersections actually have a collision rate that is higher than we would like to see. And this is some data that we have just recently been able to generate with some new information and new resources available to us, but it is very illuminating for us. And so that is the column on the far right. So I'm hoping this will allow me to do this. So the 3 intersections that we are looking at are, okay, I'm going to skip that. The Trans-Canada at Cranberry, the Trans-Canada at 10th and Mackay, and the Trans-Canada at Cedar. And I think it is important to acknowledge that those are not actually city-operated signals. Those are ministry-operated. So it's our system up to that point, but then it's through collaboration with the ministry to monitor and advance changes through those intersections. So as I said, the signal systems typically are running fairly well with a few specific shortcomings. The collision rates are something that is attention grabbing. So, and that's on a citywide basis. Now, when we focus in on those 3 particular intersections, they tend to land in the same general parameters as the system does as a whole. They're operating fairly well. They do have some weak points. They do have some collision rates that we do need to explore further to figure out what's going on there. And so we had a plan in 2019 to undertake a connection study in this area. But with the application to amend the Sandstone Master Plan, we did put that process on hold to work through the application. And with that came a lot of conversations with the community. And so a lot of what we heard was lack of redundancy and sensitivity to traveling through the intersections on the Trans-Canada Highway. And so as I'm looking through all of this, I'm sort of trying to capture and reflect the feelings and the experiences the community has. And so the one thing that really struck me is that because of the minimal redundancy, anybody entering or exiting that neighborhood needs to go through this sequence of intersections. And so this particular area may not have the highest collision rate, but whenever there is a collision, the entire community has to experience it. And so it is a significant frustration to them. Similarly, if there is construction or additional demand for a specific event, maybe there's something going on downtown, more congestion through that area is just a bigger and bigger constraint to get residents to and from their homes or to and from their places of employment or getting to their daily needs. I've presented a map of the area here, and the key things that I want to go through with you on this are some of the barriers and challenges that the area has, what we know about demand for movement to and from the community, the current visions, either through the OCP or through the Transportation Master Plan, and then potential opportunities that have been emerging over the last 18 months through discussions with the ministry and the development applicant. So at first, I have the city boundaries, the highways, the Trans-Canada, the Parkway. I've also got rail diagonally bisecting the site. I also would like to highlight that this area here is an environmentally sensitive area. That's the Harewood Plains. I would also point out that we've got Wexford Creek coming through. And so the combination of highways, rail, political boundaries, environmentally sensitive areas continues to identify or create challenges to adding connectivity to the community. So from my understanding from the motion, the discussion is really relating to the residents that have to come in from the southern limits of the city through this area and then travel into the city. And so what we've been able to gather so far in the traffic demand side of things is that approximately 30% of the population of this community travels to Southgate, and the remaining 70 are either going to downtown or north to some area beyond 5th Street. As I mentioned, in discussions with the community, there are some constraints and there are some points of concern that are just continuing to grow as demand on the corridor grows. Coming back to what we have in current plans are a number of potential options to create some redundancy at a slightly larger scale, but they do have influence on this system as a whole. And so the first L-shaped hook we typically call the Cranberry Connector. Its intent is to create a bypass around the TCH between Cranberry and somewhere on 10th. We've got an alignment study that suggests that one corridor may be preferable, but there are the Junction Avenue one may also be a viable option as well. We also have the Fielding connection, and that really is an effort to provide a secondary connection from lands to the west or to the east of the Trans-Canada Highway. So that's around the landfill and east towards Cedar. And so that enables people to potentially take Fielding around through to Mackay and then cross into 10th, or potentially go north to downtown. Both the Transportation Master Plan and the Sandstone Master Plan have identified a connection between this the South Nanaimo, Chase River, Cinnabar Valley neighborhood to a point on the east side of the highway. And I want to highlight that that really doesn't create redundancy to move north, except in circumstances when there's something happening on the highway that creates a barrier. And so that does potentially create an opportunity for people to go around whatever the congestion, delay, or incident are. In more recent discussions, we have had talks with the ministry and with the Sandstone applicant regarding a connection onto McEwen, which would ultimately connect onto Extension Road. And so I've got a couple of different colors here to sort of reflect the preliminary observations of this. And I can't overemphasize that these are preliminary. There's not enough information to make any assertions on this. And so the first is the blue arrow to the south. And essentially that is an off-ramp off of the parkway onto McEwen, which ultimately connects to Extension. And so this connection would provide an opportunity for anybody coming from sort of the North Nanaimo, north of 5th Street, down back into the neighborhood and enable them to divert around the Trans-Canada Highway corridor. The reflective arrow, or the north to east arrow, which I've shown in a sort of a red color, is discussions, or reflects the discussions we've had regarding an on-ramp at that location. And at this point, it has been put forward as an option to create some connectivity to from the Chase River neighborhood to areas to the south or to the east. It doesn't provide a great deal of relief for anybody aspiring to go north. And at this point, the ministry has raised some concerns or some questions about the potential of creating a weave, which basically is somebody coming onto the highway while somebody's going off and creating a zigzag pattern that can be quite complicated and it's not particularly desirable. And so there may be ways to address the questions they've asked. As I say, this is very preliminary and we have not made any conclusive determinations. And then the last point at this area is the red circle I've put on the map. And either or either of these movements will at some point, or it's likely they will develop more demand at the intersection of Extension and McEwen. And that is a very challenging intersection. It has steep approaches. It has very close private properties. It has rail. It has Wexford Creek. It has overhead utilities. It has underground utilities. So manipulations of that intersection to accommodate additional demand will require a great deal of investigation and creativity. But that is something that is, again, still very preliminary, and we are still just looking at it. one other item that has been included in the discussions, which will provide a little bit of relief to the Trans-Canada Highway, but really speaks more to traffic accessing the lands to the east, is a facility to allow for a more free-flowing left turn from the Trans-Canada Highway to Cedar Road, potentially a structure that could look something complementary to the existing bypass to the Parkway. So I think right now it's also important to understand that, or to, I guess, emphasize that the traffic on Extension Road right now sits at about 10 to 12,000 vehicles a day. And based on the conversations to this point, it's likely that future development is going to add approximately 50 to 60% more traffic. And so in order for that corridor to accommodate that growth, it will require a great deal of enhancements to increase capacity, or another potential solution, which we haven't come across yet. So as I said, we've had a lot of conversations between the ministry and the city and the development applicant, and some of the conversations that have spun out from that are direct conversations with the community association, with the ministry and the city. And we have talked through several of the immediate concerns for the neighborhood and developed sort of a short, medium, and long-term process to work with the community and address those concerns in a systematic process. So I've actually got a update meeting with the ministry, I believe it's next week, to discuss the signal operations. We have got a consultant engaged and who is preparing some preliminary plans and designs for the traffic calming on Extension Road to be shared with the community. Looking forward, we've got a commitment from the school district to undertake a companion active school travel plan for both of the elementary schools in the neighborhood. And this may seem a little off topic, but when we read through all of the concerns from the community association within the network, so not actually getting in and out, but actually in the neighborhood streets, it really became clear that it was that sort of to and from school travel that was concerning to a lot of people. And so it really resonated that this would be a process where we can capture that feedback and strategize solutions for the entire community. And so we are currently planning to start that in September of 2022, I believe. And so,
Mr. Rosen, I'm sorry to interrupt. Councillor Geselbrecht has a question.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I was just question just on the projected growth for that area. Is that within already like pre-approved subdivisions, or is that coming from potential other developments?
That is based on currently adopted plans.
Okay.
So
thanks.
There may be some refinement to that.
Yeah. Thanks.
And Councillor Armstrong.
Are we taking questions now? Because I got a lot. I thought we were supposed to wait. Is that what you said or no?
I thought when Mr. Rose was presenting, we could go back and forth with him, but...
Oh, okay, I got lots then.
Would you like to go now?
Yes, please.
Great.
Okay, so a couple of things that come up for me. First of all, there's been a lot of conversation in the Chase River area that this is only about Extension Road, and I think I want to make it pretty clear, and I think Councillor Brown can speak for himself, but for me, this wasn't just about Extension Road. This is about exactly what you're talking about. How do we move people in that area, especially with the concerns about how do we get kids to and from school safely. People are moving more towards biking, so it's not just about extension. To me, that's a separate issue as well. So I just wanted to clarify that for people that are listening, that the point wasn't to delay the work on extension. But one of the questions I do have, we've had many different engineering reports throughout the 30 years on the issues out there. Do any of them have any consistency in what a possible solution is? And it may be very expensive, but do they have consistency? But it's maybe engineering department thinks that it's too expensive, or?
I think the consistency is redundancy, to create redundancy in the system. To this is something we've probably talked about in different locations, but we can continue to build a bigger pipe, but that bigger pipe is going to continue to reach capacity. And so the more secondary routes and connection points that we can create, the less burden we put on any one of them. So I think that the redundancy would be the theme from all of them.
Another thing that was put to me, and I don't know the answer to this, but it was something that came up at some of my communication with the Chase River neighborhood, was would a traffic circle be an option for that area at Cranberry?
Through the chair, is there a specific location, or is
No, right where the light is now, do the traffic circle there in that area, which would make traffic would flow a lot faster. They wouldn't have to wait for lights. I know they're doing that in other cities, like Toronto's going to more in very big areas. So is like the road out to the airport in Sydney. There's lots of places looking at putting in the 2-lane traffic circles, which is a lot cheaper, moves traffic faster, and they don't seem to have the injury rates as high as the lights.
So I would kind of be stepping outside of our area of authority, because those two intersections are both ministry operated.
Mm-hmm. But has it come up in your conversations with them, or is that something that we should be asking?
I have not heard the discussion about roundabouts at either of the Cranberry TCH or the Tampton TCH intersections.
Okay. And then when we were talking, when you go to your chart where you saw the number of collisions, does that reflect, I know it reflects just collisions, but does that reflect to high injury rates and fatalities, or just collisions?
No, so that's actually, that information is literally hot off the press. It's just in the last couple of weeks that we've been able to assemble the data and generate some mapping to reflect that. So it's quite timely, but that is just a first cut with a 5-year horizon of collisions. And so what we would need, kind of jumping back to the last conversation, that's the attention grabbing. So now what we need to do is drill down into that and find out which movements are generating the collision rates and what other factors are contributing to it.
And then this will be my last one for now. There's been a lot of emphasis put on sandstone is going to come in and help solve the problem. For me, this has been going on for many years, no disrespect to sandstone or Seacliff. But this problem is going to exist whether Sandstone or Seacliff comes on board, and if they do come on board, it's going to magnify. So I think obviously we can look at Sandstone. I believe that they're looking at bringing in almost $80 million towards support the infrastructure changes that are required. So are we really working with them, or are we doing our own separate plan, or are we doing both? And then my final point on that, and is Snuneymuxw First Nation involved as well?
So we have been in conversations with Sandstone for the last, I think, almost 2 years to progress the discussion about what mitigation could or should be considered. And that conversation is ongoing. We haven't come up with anything conclusive yet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Councillor Thorpe has a question.
Thank you, Chair, very much. Through you, Mr. Rose. Thanks for the report. I think more than once I've commented and complimented city staff on the amount of long-range, long-term planning that goes on in our city that many residents don't think about or aren't aware of. And I think that's really important. This area has been on our radar for a long time, and it's growing, as we know, very quickly, and has the potential to really explode in growth if Sandstone moves ahead eventually. Whether it does or not, as Councillor Armstrong says, I think the residents in this area, from what I have heard, are looking for assurance that the city is examining the problem, mainly the problem related to redundancy. And so when I look on upcoming work in the next 6, 12 months and so on, I see things about school travel plans and pedestrian connections and bike lanes on Extension Road, and those are all nice, and I would probably support them. But the concerns I'm hearing are the traffic volume in that area and the lack of redundancy. And as I said, I think residents want assurance that we're looking for solutions. And I'm really interested to know how, I want to say how quickly, I guess a time frame of dealing with this issue before it gets out of control. And specifically, I'd like to ask you, has Ministry of Transportation weighed in on these options? Are they supportive of changes? Do they have any specific recommendations? Are they willing to work with the city? Are they willing to put money into some of these potential partial solutions at least?
So I think there's a couple of questions in there, so I have to trust my memory.
If not, I'll reword.
Perfect. Short and to the point, yes, the ministry is working with us. They've been in part of all of the conversations since I think the first Residents Association meeting I attended in late 17, early 18. And so we have been discussing what options are available. And to be quite frank, the redundancy ones typically carry big price tags. We have a lot of challenges to overcome to create more connectivity to this neighborhood. And beyond those conversations, I'm not really in a position to speak on behalf of the ministry. I mean, there's definitely interest in collaborating. They have expressed a commitment to me to work together on these short-term solutions. I think one of the things, and I'm actually going to probably jump a little bit ahead on my slide deck here, but one of the things, so in 2019, we did have a plan to embark on a study to look at the alternate access routes, what could be done to create a complementary system to the Cranberry Connector, something along those lines. We didn't have a known outcome. We just knew that we wanted to look at this again and try and come up with a solution. And the ministry was on board with participating. However, when the land use change or the land uses became a question, it became really challenging to move forward because land use is fundamental to knowing how you're going to manage your mobility. And so we can have, we can look at pretty much any land use that the community aspires to, but creating a mobility system that supports that and meets the same goals and expectations could vary greatly. So if we have something that's entirely industrial, the transportation demand is probably relatively low. If we have something that's entirely retail, it's probably quite high. So when land use is changing, it becomes this moving target for us. So that's why I say we took a step back from our plan and postponed it to understand what the land use could look like so that when the opportunity comes to move forward, we do have a holistic and solid agenda on where to go and what to do.
Thank you. And if I may, Chair, one other point related to what you just said, Mr. Rose. Is it accurate or fair to say that our movement toward possible solutions regarding the redundancy problem is separate from waiting on news of the Sandstone development going ahead? Are we looking to find solutions regardless of that? Or are we waiting to hear about that project as it develops before we make decisions?
I think that we can progress some elements of it. But as I say, if there's potential for changes to land use, then the solutions and the ability to resource these solutions could be quite different. So, I kind of go back to the question about the pipe and redundancy. I mean, we can have a little bit bigger road and we can have a little bit more delay, or we can have more redundancy and less delay and more connectivity. There's a lot of things that are moving here. So unfortunately, there's not much, there's not anything I can really put my finger on, say, nope, that's exactly what we can do that now and just sort of let this play out around us, because it doesn't create a holistic system. It just has these pieces within it.
Thank you. I'll be interested in the delegations and subsequent questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question from Councillor Armstrong.
Just wanted to build on what Councillor Thorpe said. So obviously we've got our OCP amendment and rezoning request coming forward from Sandstone, which will end up going to public hearing. So will the decision of the rezoning and OCP application will that be able to provide you with more clarification as to moving forward?
Once we have a conclusive land use, then it takes one of the variables out of our equation. And so now we just need to work with the rest of, like, all of the players to make sure that the solutions that come out of that meet the expectations of the community.
Okay, thank you. I'll have something for you after the delegations. Thank you.
Mr. Rose, I'm going to interject with a question. Regarding the 6-month and the 6 to 12-month pieces of work that have been identified, those are continuing no matter what the land use outcome is, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. No more questions, you can carry on.
Chair, there was a scheduled recess for 3 p.m. I know we have delegations waiting. I'm wondering if council needs a quick 5-minute recess before hearing from the delegations and finishing. This discussion could go long, so maybe
I'm seeing some heads nodding, so why don't we let Mr. Rose finish and then we'll take a quick 5-minute break?
Okay, 2 more quick slides. So the motion put to staff was to generate some information on the potential to do a South Nanaimo mobility study. And so this image hopefully reflects the area that council was aspiring to have studied. To my understanding, this is where it is. And so in the report, we do indicate that having a known land use is preferable. And the numbers and resources required to move forward with it are predicated on having a known land use. And so we would come in, assess the current conditions, build on all of the information we already have, consider the land use, go through identifying options, develop business plan and phasing plan. And so that sort of potential options and business case and phasing plan would really, it would require a fairly significant amount of community and stakeholder input, from what I can tell, because I think there's going to be some important questions that need to be answered as part of that. And so at this point, we expect it would take about 3 years and cost about $350,000. And I did say 1,200 hours of staff time, and a few people kind of raised their eyebrow and looked at me and went, I don't know what that means. So that's quite a bit of staff time. Essentially, if we were to embark on something like this, we would need to have a bit of give some consideration to what may not be able to be accomplished in lieu of this. So. At the end of the day, we have some big questions. We need to understand land use. We need to make a determination on what the community's aspirations for mobility and connectivity are, and then come up with an investment plan to meet those goals and create the community we want. So, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. Any questions before we break, council? Okay, then let's meet back at 3:15, please.
Hi, Leonard Krogh here. I'm here with Karen Lindsay today. She's going to show me how to sign up for our app.
Voyant Alert, the City of Nanaimo's emergency notification system. So we'll start by going into the App Store, Mayor Krogh.
Done.
Next, you're going to hit search. And you're going to search for the app, which is Voyant Alert. So it's VOYENT. Now you see, it's already selected it. Click there, hit get, and then we're going to install.
And why are we downloading this app?
We're downloading that so that you can get this onto your phone system, and what it will do is it will send you a push notification out. So if the City of Nanaimo issues an emergency alert, it will actually push the notification out onto your phone. The really nice part of this app is that it's anonymous, so it goes by postal code. So we're not requesting you to put your name or personal information in, it just works off of the app through your phone system. There are also, if you have family members or friends that maybe don't have a smartphone or would like another way, you can also sign up online or call our Public Works Department, and they have phone and texting options available as well. So there's lots of options for people depending on what their needs are.
Fabulous. So you can rest with some comfort knowing you can find out what's necessary and know that people who are important to you are notified.
Absolutely. So now you have Voyant Alert on your phone. And now just select open. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to tap in the postal code that it's prompting you.
All right. So
you just click on there and start entering. And then find on a map. So here you'll see the welcome page for the City of Nanaimo, and you want to subscribe to notifications, yes?
Yes.
Click that you agree to the terms, so click both to the yes for consent, and then hit next. And it's going to ask to either allow or not allow notifications, and you want to always allow.
Always allow.
Always allow, and the reason that is if you don't allow, it won't push the notification out to you. So always allow.
Always allow.
And now you see here, you've got a message to accept that you've signed out. That's the two-factor authentication, and you're going to tap yes. And now you're in the system. Also, when you have a moment, we recommend that you pick your locations and sign up based on those locations, and then you'll get alerts from the City of Nanaimo.
Karen, thank you. Everyone, sign up.
Hey, Tiana.
Hey.
It sure is the coldest rink in town.
Oh, yeah, buddy! Nice save, James!
Wow, your goalie is keeping you guys in the game. Cheers.
Cheers.
Oh, man, that's hot.
Sorry, that's the way I like it. Oh. Go, 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 go! Penalty shot!
Scalds from hot drinks are a leading cause of hospitalization for children under 5.
2 minutes, down in the front, unsportsmanlike conduct.
Hot tea and coffee will cause serious burns to a child in less than a second.
Got it, kid? Use the lid.
What we have here is the Real Ice technology that was installed at the Nanaimo Ice Center. It allows us to use cold water from traditionally hot water that we used to use for making ice. Basically, the water will come in through the bottom, go in through a vortex idea, making the air bubbles microscopic in size, which makes a better, more dense sheet of ice.
Differences that you'll see with the Real Ice is there's less snow developed, so that's easier for cleaning, and also it's a denser, harder, clear ice. So the ice skaters will certainly enjoy that. And the city plans to implement Real Ice at our other 2 arenas as well. Some of the other efficiencies we've implemented in this facility are LED lights in some areas, and we've also, in the last few years, installed a higher efficiency refrigeration system, which lowers our energy costs. Both Zambonis at our facility are now electrically operated, so there's no harmful emissions, and they're very quiet as well. So what this means for the city is that we're able to use less energy and also reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions, which is more beneficial to the environment.
We're here at Bruce and Dundas. Somebody's stolen the street names that were here, so we're here to replace them. Our sign shop has just generated us 2 signs, so I'm going to go through the process of putting it together and reinstalling the street names. First thing, we got to center the signs. We do everything on this truck. We've got all the equipment on here to build, install, remove, repair, whether it's street signs, street names, posts, banners, Christmas decorations, and so forth. I'm going to basically just put the sign in the brackets, and we'll be doing both signs, of course. So I've got a cross bracket that I'm going to put in, and then add the top sign, which is this street we're on, Dundas. Sorry, do the same there. We put the street that we're coming up to on the bottom, so they all basically have the same. The cross street will be on the top. We got to put some bolts in to secure them so nobody will steal the street name. We're ready to go. Just put this back and we'll go out and install this where the missing one is. Every year we do what we call a stop sign survey, where we go around and check all the stops. We clean them, make sure they're in the right spots, in good condition, not bent, and we also clean the street names, make sure they're good. As we're doing that, if there's ones that we decide we want to replace, we do that at that time. This year we're looking at approximately about 120 sets. It's very expensive to do, but we're continually, weekly changing street names because of either them getting damaged or people breaking them and taking them. So I'll put this on, and then I put a bolt through to secure it to the post. There we go. And that's good, we're done. Dundas and Bruce Ave are now ready to go.
Okay, Council. Thank you, Terry. So we have, Mr. Rose, do you have any wrap-up words? Okay, you're good. So we have 2 delegations. The first is Mr. Porter. Mr. Porter, if you could come to the podium. Ms. Gurry, can you, are these 5-minute presentations?
That's correct. It's they've signed up to be delegations, so each one has 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Porter, I'll give you a signal when you're about 4 minutes in.
I'm here as a resident, and I live on the heavy industrial route of Richardson Road. I have some numbers here in regards to the expansion of our neighborhood, and some of the numbers, these are pulled off the city website a week ago today. On Cranberry Avenue alone, we have 102 childcare spaces. That's people coming in, dropping kids off, going out. We're looking at a new daycare starting, I believe, January. It will have 52 more spaces, and that will be open to anybody, not just our neighborhood. Potentially 4 car trips a day for a child. That has the option of adding a further 24 in the future. That puts 100 to almost 80 kids on Cranberry Avenue. None of them driving. They're going to have to be offered rides in and out. In recent time, we've turned Cranberry Avenue, Extension Avenue, and Richardson Road into a heavy industrial trail, servicing Cinnabar Farms. I don't necessarily have an issue with that. Where my concerns come in is in the summertime. A lot of extra trucks are in there, a lot of them from the Lower Mainland. They don't know where they're going. They're watching their GPSs, trying to figure out why they're going to a farm up on a hill. They're not paying attention. We've got 122 family units being built out there today, between single-family homes with suites, single-family homes, and that's on Cranberry Inn. I'm not talking the 211 apartments at 10th and Junction, which will bypass Cranberry intersection, causing more traffic issues. We have 20 trucking companies working between Old Victoria and Cedar. Those trucks run 24/7 for the most part, with C-SPAN at Duke Point now. The TCH past Cranberry is busy at all times. They run all night, bringing their loads in, break them down, ship them out. They're back and forth all day. As far as the, we've heard quite a number of things about Sandstone. My understanding, it's a 20-year build. Being that I'm almost 70, I'll never see the end of it. Right now, I wouldn't give you $5 to see the start of it. Our problems are here today. I've seen lots of maps, I've seen lots of plans. What I haven't seen is land set aside to do any of these projects. Do we kick neighbors out of the neighborhood because we're taking your land for a road? The McEwen Road, my understanding from residents, it was built as an off-ramp. As former truck driver working construction in various aspects, the amount of road work that was put in there is in the millions of dollars, and it does nothing. I've asked if it could be opened up for nothing more than emergency. No, can't do it. In our neighborhood in the very recent past, emergency crews responding from the Cranberry Fire Hall couldn't, because they couldn't get onto Cranberry Avenue. Cinnabar Farms had to sneak a 53-foot trailer into the Boys and Girls Club to clear traffic for them. If you're driving a desk, not a big deal. If you're laying in the ditch, big deal. We need action now. We don't need studies. We don't need maps. We need solid plan, solid action. Because tomorrow it's going to get more expensive. And the day after that, more expensive. And apparently my neighborhood's chipping in a lot of money to CAC. We need action. I hear lots of plans. I've heard lots of traffic studies, but there's still no plan. We've had numerous fatals. We've had numerous close calls at Cranberry. What you do about it is mind-boggling to my estimation, because somebody forgot to leave extra room. There's a slough on one side, services on the west side. We're supposed to have a curbed cement sidewalk from 10th to Cranberry. We do not. Kids walk every day from Chase River down to Mackay to go home on the shoulder of a gravel road. That's unacceptable. There's services that have to be dealt with on the shoulder of the road. I get it, it's gonna be a pain to do. But ignoring it isn't taking care of the problem, it's exacerbating it. We have 17 lots that applied for subdivision in my neighborhood. Once they're passed, the number of units going on, don't even like to think about. We're running on roads from 1800. They haven't improved much. They got concrete on, asphalt on them. We don't have a four-way square intersection in Cinnabar Valley. The closest one is Richardson and Porter Road. Four-way wide open, but it's not flat. Luckily, it's a four-way. I've seen no instances of problems there. Richardson onto Extension, completely blind to the left. Roberta Road East onto Extension, completely blind to the left. You can hide a B train behind the bush.
Mr. Porter, you're almost at time.
Okay. We need action, is what we need. How it's done, there's smarter people out there than me. But this talking about it ain't cutting it. We need a solid plan before we lose more people. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Any questions for the delegation? Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Parker. Same rules apply. You'll have about 5 minutes. I'll give you a signal when you're close. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Our association knows that our area is very desirable. We are concerned that many more homes will be built or other housing developments will be approved by city staff in the near future. With this type of growth, there are really no significant financial contributions made to address our existing traffic issues. There continues to be only one primary road into Cinnabar Valley that is of use by the majority of residents. We desperately need a new exit point which allows us to travel north or south on either the Trans-Canada Highway or the Nanaimo Parkway. Our residents are presently forced to drive downtown or to North Nanaimo to access goods and services. We want to access these goods and services locally and thereby getting out of our cars. We are appreciative of the city wanting to develop a mobility plan for our area, which will likely include bike lanes and improved transit options. However, there are more significant traffic and safety issues that need to be addressed first. We have identified many of these issues and have proposed ways to improve them, which are listed in Appendix A of the staff report. We just need funding from the City of Nanaimo and from the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure to address them. As always, our association wants to be both responsive to our residents in our area and collaborative in seeking solutions with city staff on the traffic issues. I want to ensure that Council is fully aware that our association supports the Sandstone Master Plan, as outlined in my letter of last week, provided the changes we identified are reinstated. We want Council to accept that plan and the proposed traffic improvements that come with it. Finding funds for road improvements is always a significant issue, and to walk away from likely millions of dollars from Seacliff to help address some of these issues would appear to be foolish. I would also like to know if Council and staff have reached out to the Nanaimo First Nation regarding this report and its implications, as they will also be impacted by the traffic issues in our area. Let's finally put the ongoing discussion about the Cranberry Connector to rest. Our association realizes that it will likely never be built, as it has been postponed over and over again, even though the city has likely collected significant DCC funds to help fund it. The connector was initiated with the construction of our new fire hall in 2008, and nothing has happened since, except for delays and promises to study the issues that would affect the connection to Wexford and Lawler roads. The proposed sandstone master plan does not complicate this project as mentioned in the staff report. I would like to remind you, all of you, that our area has grown substantially since 2008, and we will continue with this growth with or without any part of sandstone being started. In closing, I would like to ask that Council really look at ways to address the need for a second exit from Cinnabar Valley. We realize that this will require a significant amount of funding, which will take some time to gather. Therefore, I am requesting that City staff, along with the other parties, including the Island Corridors Foundation, again review the possibility of using the ENN Railway underpass of the Nanaimo Parkway as a road. As we know, that railway was presently used sparingly at best, and if pavement was added, it could allow for safe traffic between Extension Road and 10th Street. In May of 1995, our association received a letter from the Nanaimo Parkway project manager. This was in response to our request to enlarge the pipe that the ENN Railway now uses that goes under the parkway. We had requested that the pipe be enlarged to accommodate 2 lanes of traffic, in addition to the railway. At that time, this request would have estimated to have cost $1.1 million. It was denied. Creating a new road now will allow traffic from Cinnabar area to connect to 10th Street and will likely exceed that amount by 20 to 30 times. Maybe this is not possible, so let's find a solution that will alleviate the congestion, improve the traffic flow and safety for the residents of Chase River by getting shovels into the ground instead and stopping the endless reports and studies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. We have a question from Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. We're looking at the mobility study at this particular GPC right now. So, but if I'm hearing from you correctly, and I think I heard from Mr. Rose that it's going to take up considerable time if we do go with the mobility study and considerable dollars. So are you more in favor, as representing the society, or neighborhood association, sorry, of moving forward with extension versus the mobility hub study?
We need to do something, like to continue studying something, as Mr. Rose says, another 3 years. How many more years are we going to study things for? We need to get shovels in the ground. There's got to be lots of reports that have been generated, lots of information. There's got to be some way. We know that our area is surrounded by the parkway on one side, the TCH on the other side, the railway, streams, all that stuff. There is no easy solution. There isn't. Let's just add what it is. So whatever it is going to be, there's going to be millions and millions and millions of dollars spent, right? And to think that we had a simple solution in 1995 that we brought to council, that we brought to the Ministry of Transportation for $1.1 million, we would not be having this discussion today. It would be in place. It would have been in place for 20 years. I just don't know what else to say, like to get people to move along on solving these issues. As you know, as Mr. Rose said, we know that there's tons more development coming with existing lots as it is right now. If you add sandstone to that, what's that number go up by? And you know, sandstone on our side of the road is not really going to be, has not changed since that plan was adopted in 2009. We know there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 600 homes coming. We know that. The other side of the highway is a different story. And I think there's enough roads to deal with that. We need to just address the people in Cinnabar Valley and Extension Road.
So just what I'm hearing from you, and please correct me if I'm wrong, what I'm hearing from you is your number one priority is we need another route in and out of Chase River. Yep. Or even if there's a start of, like I do believe that I heard from Mr. Rose earlier, or maybe it was Mr. Lindsay, that they're looking at an option of maybe 2 left lanes coming out of Cranberry, like extending that as a temporary, as a starting point. Would something like that work? I mean, I think what I'm hearing from Mr. Rose, and again, that is a very complicated area, and I think you've acknowledged that as well. We've got so many different things in there, and unfortunately, it's the way things were planned years ago. And if it was being done today, we wouldn't have the issues. I'm pretty confident in saying that, but I know we've got the environmental concerns out there. We've got the railroad, which has a huge impact. Then we have Modi that has to be involved. I believe that we need to have Snuneymuxw First Nation involved at the table as well, because they are a player, and I think that's starting to happen. But again, I need to hear, like, specifically from you if you think the extension road is your #1 priority versus a mobility study.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner.
And through you to the delegation, where would you like to see that second exit? Because we've been talking today about the possibility of having an off-ramp heading south into the valley. Where would you like to see the, because it's entirely possible you could make an exit out heading south. To get an exit out heading north that's where I guess where the big money comes in. Is an exit south okay? I mean, it's not okay. I know what we really need, but like, is that an okay for a while type of thing?
From my point of view, it's a stopgap measure at best. Because again, all it does is send the traffic down the parkway for whatever, half a kilometer or whatever it is. Then they're going to turn and go right back on the highway, either heading back into town, to downtown, or there's no way to get north from our part of the world, which is where everything is in our city, right? So I don't know if it means that the city needs to approach the regional district and develop a road that goes around our area into the regional district and then comes back onto the parkway at some location. I don't know. I mean, when the parkway went in, McEwen Road was supposed to connect up with Harewood Mines Road, right? Well, there's an awful lot of rock there, an awful lot of blasting, and there's environmentally sensitive areas. How much of a check does the city want to write? That's basically what this comes down to. And the Ministry of Transportation and everybody else, right? This is not an easy fix.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Parker, I see no further questions. Thank you for your delegation.
Thank you.
Okay, Council, so we have a lot of information. Councillor Armstrong, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question for staff. After hearing the information provided by Mr. Parker, can you comment on that for clarity as to the McEwen Road and as to the Cranberry Connector? Why those are no longer viable?
Through the chair, McEwen, I believe, was envisioned to connect with Harewood Mines Road, but as I noted, in 2013, I think it was, there was an environmental covenant put on that property when the discovery of the, I think it's the Lotus Panatus plant. So there's environmental considerations for that. The Cranberry Connector is a potential option. It's on the books. We are aware of it. One of the things that the Cranberry Connector alignment study was completed in 99-2000, and it was conducted and processed through the lens of 99-2000 in the context of environmental parameters, impacts on housing and things of that nature. Advanced 20 some odd years, and things have changed, priorities have changed, and one of the challenges with that alignment that was identified is that it goes right up Wexford Creek, and it would end up eliminating a number of mobile home dwellings. And so, as I said, I think there may be a different route that is more appealing. But the difficulty with that is that we don't have any of the right-of-way. We would have to acquire all of it. And so, and then looking at what sort of demand we could potentially see there, it's, present day, sort of 3,000 to 4,000 vehicles, and the solution is tens of millions of dollars. So, I don't think anything is not possible. It's just a question of what presents or what represents the best value to the community as a solution.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up, I guess one of the concerns I have is that this has been on the books for many, many years to try and fix, and I don't believe that the city has invested a lot out in that area. That's my personal viewpoint. I could be incorrect, but I don't think this problem's going to go away. And I think we're just going to have to bite the bullet. And then it's up to this council or the next council to decide, are we willing to spend the dollars to fix the problem? And I appreciate where you're coming from, that you say that it's very costly on a cost-benefit analysis, which is fine. But at the end of the day, I still think it's the council decision to make. And it's something that I'm going to be thinking about. Like I'm sort of crafting a notice of motion. I'm not going to do it today because it's not fair and I need to think on it more, but there will be one coming, and I'll consult with Ms. Gurry and yourselves as well as the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Councillor Turley.
Chair, through you to staff, do we have traffic counts for the intersection at Extension and the Trans-Canada Highway with regard to the volume of turns left going north versus the volume of turns right at that intersection going south?
Through the chair, we do have traffic count data for all three of those intersections. That's where we were able to support our understanding that some are probably 35% of traffic coming out of the Cinnabar Valley is going north, somewhere north of 5th Street.
35%, you said?
It's 70% split between downtown and north of 5th Street, and so I'm presuming that it's close to 50-50. We don't have the explicit breakdown, but we do have the traffic count. So
yeah, the reason I'm asking is if we were to look at trying to get the McEwen connection in where people can go out and turn if they're heading south, they can easily get onto the parkway that way, heading south, and people entering the area can come off the parkway as they're going south and avoid the Trans-Canada Highway connections altogether. Would that make any difference? Is basically why I'm asking the north versus south.
Well, sorry, through the chair, I think that the vast majority of traffic is traveling north in some direction. Whether it's to Southgate, downtown, or north of VIU. So I don't know how valuable a southbound entry point to one of the highways would be. We have heard from the ministry that they do have some concerns about the details of what that on-ramp could look like. And so I think that would require quite a bit more investigation, but I also don't know if we can substantiate how much usage it would get either.
Okay, yeah, that's why I asked a question about that north-south. I wasn't referring, I'm referring as they're turning left going north and turning right going south. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turley. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Mr. Rose, having heard the staff information in your report and the delegations, and I think Council is all pretty familiar with this whole topic now and familiar with the challenges, the great challenges that it presents. But my question's a fairly simple one in a sense. Has staff to this point identified, just theoretically, a preferred possible solution? Because I'm hearing that McEwen Road, no, that's not going to work. The Cranberry Connector, no, that's not going to work. Is there any option that staff can point to and say, well, this might be something that we could investigate further? Because, if I may, as others have said, this problem is just going to get worse. It's not going to go away, and eventually we're going to have to solve it. It might take years and years, but I'd prefer that we were starting on it sooner. So where's our starting point? Is it one of those options that we've looked at before? Is there anything that you can point to and say, here's a potential solution that we can investigate?
So, through the chair, I think that there are options that in sort of our wildest dreams discussions we've identified as maybe this will help, maybe that will help. But all of them have been sort of unfortunately looked at through the lens of sort of how much value is this going to generate versus cost, because the solutions to get out of this are substantial, and you know, they either involve structures, they involve crossing lands outside the city, or significant earthworks. And so, you know, I think there's been some sort of conversations with ourselves and Modi kind of going, well, we could do this and we could do that and we could do the other thing. But as soon as we start sketching these lines, it looks like a bowl of spaghetti on map. We start putting dollar figures to it, and they add up very, very, very quickly. And so I think that I know everybody cringes when they hear this term that we should study this some more, but I think it is something that we need to. The decision we make needs to be rationalized in that it is the optimal way forward, because these are going to be substantial investments, and so I don't actually know a way around identifying that and clarifying that and providing council with all of the information needed to make that decision to go forward without doing some form of a study.
Thank you, and I understand that, and I sympathize with all the challenges you're facing, as I sympathize with the residents of the area and their patience with this problem and their frustration. I guess what I would like to see us get to a point of is having staff be able to come to council and say, here's what we've identified as sort of our preferred solution. Yes, it's going to cost millions of dollars, and then it will be a council decision to determine, yes, is that expense worth the value that it will bring? That's eventually the decision council will have to make. But I'd like us to be at a point sooner than later where we can actually make that decision on a given option. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair, and I agree with Councillor Thorpe 100% on that part. So that's twice this month. I have a couple of questions, if I may, and Mr. Holmes might have to answer this one, is how many homes can be built right now with all the subdivisions we work like that we can't stop from being built, as an example? It's kind of a weird way of asking it, but I mean, what are we committed to can be built already without us saying a moratorium on new subdivisions? So you thought you were just going to be able to sit there all day long, didn't you?
Thank you, through the chair, to Councillor Bonner's question. I think that's quite a difficult one to answer without doing some detailed analysis. Subdivision, we could have a look at what technically might be feasible based on minimum lot size, but there are many different factors that go into subdivision that may limit ultimately what is developed. And many of the subdivisions that we're seeing in the area are smaller infill subdivisions. They're not, a lot of the larger parcels have been developed at the moment, and or under, they've completed subdivision recently and are on many building permits going in for new single-family dwellings. But many of them are smaller infill type subdivisions. Some of them have challenges related to servicing, access, road frontage, that makes it difficult to, without going through a detailed subdivision review application, makes it difficult to confirm that they have viable subdivision potential. As far as incrementally, I guess part of what's happened is you're seeing a parcel fabric and road network that was largely created in the area pre-amalgamation, and then obviously complicated by the as far as access to the area by the introduction of the parkway. There's obviously the railway has been there historically for a very long time, but we have incremental subdivision that's happening in the area under existing zoning largely, and it's in and of itself, smaller subdivisions are not able to provide the overall. It's incremental. They're not able to make significant improvements to the road network. They do add somewhat to the obviously incrementally to the traffic in the area, but the existing conditions and the limited access have been there for some time. So I can't speak to the number of units that could be supported. We know that Sandstone's talking about in their land, which is the bulk of the development land, around 600 units in varying forms. But and to speak to the I guess the capacity of the road network to handle the additional incremental subdivision, I think I'd have to defer to Mr. Rose and and to the Ministry of Transportation as well. I mean, there are definitely temporary or issues with intersections, but it's largely, we do see a lot of sort of compressed traffic that's AM, PM peak, folks coming in and out, as we've touched on previously. There aren't services in the area. Folks leaving the area to acquire any services need to leave the area, obviously. So there are, to work, there's AM, PM peak congestion periods that do have implications to existing intersection function. But the overall incremental development in the area, other than Sandstone, I can't give you an accurate number at this point.
Maybe I'll ask a question that's slightly different is, as council, can we say in a certain area that for the next period of time we'll be doing no more subdivisions?
No, there would be, there's existing zoning in place. Council could consider altering the zoning that's in place for an area. That would be a decision that obviously there's also the official community plan that's in place that supports, provides direction on the future growth and the future type of development that we expect in an area, and any decisions that council makes would have to be consistent with the official community plan when it comes to rezoning. So I think, there are definitely concerns you're hearing from the neighborhood with regard to existing development in the area and the potential for additional under existing zoning, and then layer on that the development from Sandstone. But I would say outside of a moratorium on subdivision for existing zone land, no. If there are other servicing challenges, water or wastewater to some of the parcels, they'll sort of self-select not to develop until those issues are addressed. But the transportation network, that's not going to prohibit some of that subdivision from happening right now. And as far as the functional issues with the road and the level of service that's provided, I think that's something that we'd look to Mr. Rose and his staff, and then the Ministry of Transportation to give us guidance on that when making those decisions to approve further development. But again, the major player in the area for large greenfield development is Sandstone. There is other incremental development for sure, but I can't give you an accurate number on how many units.
Okay, thank you. One other question, if I may.
Yep.
Not sure who would answer this. Have we ever asked the members of the community why they travel out of the area? I mean, it's pretty obvious they're going for work and, for whatever reason, shopping, that sort of thing, right? With the idea that if we knew exactly the reasons for travel and we could possibly build the amenities in the area to reduce travel, like if we could reduce travel out of the area by 30%, that would be a significant change in the traffic going in and out of there.
Through the chair, so I'm going to short answer say no, I don't believe we've inquired as to where everybody goes, but the logic of people have to go somewhere to work, they have to go somewhere to get their groceries, their medical appointments, they have to do all of these things which don't exist within the community right now. So that's our indicator to reflect that we know that everything generates a trip. And so I think you're sort of getting into the conversation of land use and what the community wants or what could contribute to fewer trips out of the community. And that's a much bigger conversation, which is sort of encapsulated in the Reimagine process. So
I'm just thinking out of the box here. Like if we're looking at spending millions and millions of dollars on connectors, why don't we instead spend millions and millions of dollars on amenities, and you don't need the connector? I know you're going to need it eventually, right? But it's just a different way. If we're going to spend the money, let's spend it on something that actually benefits the community as opposed to just move cars around quickly. It's just me thinking. You don't have to answer that one. So.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Chair. Just through you to staff, I can't remember, but the order of magnitude of cost for compared to sort of the north end solutions compared to another exit out south of the community. Do we ever have numbers? Like, is it dramatically cheaper to go put another route in from the south, or is it sort of on the same order of costs?
Sorry, through the chair, are you, is the question the cost comparison to create a northbound connection versus a southbound connection?
Yeah. like a connection, you know, that we've got McEwen and those ones coming in from the north, to connect into Extension, but I'm talking about from the other end, like down to Cedar, that direction.
As if we were going to try and generate a connection out through Extension or something that like that area. That's not as well sort of known or discussed because that has equal topographic challenges. It still has rail. It has connecting into whatever exists.
So that's never been explored then. Okay. No. I just from the presenters, I had assumed that there was some exploration of that as sort of a stopgap. Okay.
No.
Mayor Krog.
Thank you very much. This is one of the more frustrating issues the city faces. I think I heard Mr. Parker say today, and Councillor Bonner sort of followed it up, what the people of this neighborhood, this area, this part of the community want are access to amenities. And I don't think it's just public amenities, and if it was just public amenities, this might be simpler. Absolutely right. Just put the equivalent of the Oliver Woods, stick a pool in the south end, do all of those things, and that would solve the problem. But I'm looking to Mr. Parker, who's been a spokesperson for his community for a very long time, but I don't think he's just talking about the public amenities. He's talking about access to malls. He's talking about access to Costco, the famous Costco that everybody seems to have access to in order to survive in the 21st century. And this is where the problem comes. Well, one of the many problems, Costco goes where Costco wants to go. Malls and mall developers like Woodgrove and Northbrook and North Nanaimo Town Center, or whatever the name is right now, go where they can make money. And they go where they can make money because there's a population there who will support it. And so to get that to happen, then, and believe me, I'm not prejudging anything, I'm just throwing more fuel on the fire of this discussion. What that means is a massive development like Sandstone or another development like it is arguably crucial to ensuring that the good folks of the south end don't have to travel all the way to the north end of Nanaimo to get access to those private or public amenities that they want. If the public is living there, then the city it behooves us to provide the public amenities because the population warrants it. And if the private amenities are desirable, they'll get built because the population is there. But right now, we have an immediate traffic problem, so eloquently referred to by both delegations today and Mr. Rose in his comments. We have a population now that has trouble getting to the north end of this community, that sees a significant traffic tie-up on access to what I still call the old highway for those of us who've been around a while. If we fix that problem, that will solve it for people wanting to continue the pattern, which apparently they don't want, which is to have to travel north to get stuff. If Sandstone goes ahead, and it's not going to happen overnight, then presumably that cuts into the amount of traffic that would normally and historically be flowing north. As one questioner said, you know, do we have any idea how many people are traveling north for whatever particular reasons? That might be as useful a survey as anything we do, because I have heard the discussion around the possibilities of how to solve the immediate problems, whether it's roundabouts or the Cranberry Connector or whatever. And frankly, none of them sound particularly palatable. And this is all working on the assumption, by the way, folks, that we're going to continue to all be in our cars in 20 and 30 years. And that all of this road network that we're anxious to construct, and I won't say anxious, but we see as potentially necessary, is in fact going to be necessary. If a Costco goes in across the highway, which would be the logical place, and a large commercial style development, a southern Woodgrove, if you will, then clearly some kind of connection to that would involve a southern access onto the highway and the Duke Point connector, which would be logical, and we all, I think it's no great secret out there, the potential of some intersection on the Duke Point Highway, which, with great respect in my observation, is one of the most underutilized and expensive roads anywhere in the Central Island, except when the ferry comes off it. Those are where we're at, and I am. I guess I'm speaking for many citizens who are looking at this and going, oh my goodness, what is the sensible thing to do, either in the short term or in the longer term, if I've heard the delegations correctly, if my sense of what the community wants is accurate around access to amenities. If you want to stay at home in the South End, it ain't there right now. And as the South End continues to grow, the likelihood of those amenities coming is probably increased. But in the meantime, the traffic is problematic, to say the least, while we're waiting for something big to happen. So all I can tell you is I wish I had some solution, or I'd heard solutions today that made sense to me, both from a community development perspective and an environmental perspective, and acknowledged in a tangible way the incredible frustration of people who live and have to get into on or near, or have to get into Nanaimo on Extension Road. We have a real pickle here, and if somebody can tell me a sensible way out, I will happily support it, because I think we'll all recognize it. But I haven't heard anything from anybody anywhere, no disrespect to the thought that's gone into all of this. I haven't heard anything that says to me, this is going to work and this makes sense. I'm pleased that Councillor Armstrong, I think it was Councillor Armstrong, asked the question, would even, a double left turn lanes for the time being off Extension be seen as an improvement? Is it worthwhile from the community's perspective? And I'm looking very directly at Mr. Parker. Would it be seen as worthwhile, as at least providing some relief from the traffic type and the frustration that is felt now? Because I think that's the kind of, I will call it not even a real solution, a very temporary proposal that could be done relatively quickly, as opposed to everything else that I've heard, which indicates to me we're talking years to get some real solution. So I might feel better having gotten it off my chest, but I doubt very much I've made anyone else in this room feel better. But I'd like to think I've helped articulate the problems and the frustration around this, and where the city, in conjunction with this important part of our community, and MOTI actually figure out how to do something that'll make the lives of people in this part of town better. So I'll leave it at that. Forgive me and thank you for the indulgence, Chair.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Thank you for your words, Your Worship. I don't know if this would go to you, Mr. Rose, or if it would go to either Mr. Lindsay or Mr. Holmes. Area C is out in that direction, which is the RDN, part of the RDN. If we were to look at making a southern connection like route, like if you go up, I guess it'd be west onto Extension, then cross and then hit up to the Parkway. I don't know if that's a possibility because we would eliminate, like you said, 70% are going north, right? So even if 50% of those are going north and 20% are going into town, that would make a big difference as well to that. So is there anything we can do around that, or is our zoning such that we can't use that? Or could we change? I think it's urban growth maybe that would have to change. I'm not sure. I don't know if maybe Mr. Lindsay could answer for me.
Maybe I'll just request a clarification. So you're asking if there could be a connection from Extension sort of northwest to, let's say, Harewood Mines Road?
No, to the Parkway.
So I think that it's almost anything's possible, but I would point out that through that area, we'd likely be going through an environmentally sensitive area. We would also be going through fairly well-known mountain biking area. There's a number of things that we would want to hear feedback from the community. And on top of all of that, it's outside of the city limits. So we would need to work with the RDN or the landholder out there.
That's just was my point, because I think it's zoned for like 5-acre lots already. So, and it was just something I was thinking about. But in regards to, say we're going to use the roads, all predictions are we're using roads for many, many, many more years. So long as people still go to sports, so long as kids are still participating, you're not going to bring your kids on a bus with 3 hockey bags and whatever. So I think they're around for a long time. We still need buses, we still need fire trucks, we still need all that. So I think our roads are going to be there. But I really think that we need to bite the bullet on something, and I agree. I think it's up to us to make that hard decision. Like, I think it's up to you to come forward with your best plan, and if it costs, for the sake of argument, $1 billion, it costs $1 billion, then it's up to this council to make that decision. It's your job to bring us what you think is the best option, and then we're the ones that have to make that political decision. I mean, we've been sitting on this for many, many years, and no disrespect to you or your staff, because I do believe you're trying to find the most cost-effective solution when you do a cost-benefit analysis, which is what we do want. But I think at the end of the day, one political group, whether it be this council or the next, is going to have to bite the bullet and make a decision, yes or no. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. I think our esteemed worship in his older age is having trouble hearing. When I said out of the box, I meant way out of the box. And so that means building amenities, public and private. To me, that's the simple solution to the question here. There's always a simple solution to a problem. If you look at it, it's us humans that tend to make them complicated. Simple solution is to have people not need to drive out of Cinnabar, and that means amenities in there, and I would much rather spend taxpayers' dollars on amenities than on roads, which are sort of amenities, but we can get into that later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner. I have no one else on my list, but I have a couple of questions. So the redundancy is important to keep traffic flowing, but redundancy is also important for safety. So can staff comment on residents' ability to exit the Cinnabar Valley in an emergency?
To the chair. So right now we do have the one entry and exit to the community. We have spoken with the ministry, and we do also understand that in a emergency, whether it's an interface fire, an earthquake, something of that nature, there is a possibility to reopen the McEwen connection. I was actually part of barriering it about 15 years ago because people were just driving through it anyway. And so, as I say, in an emergency, that access can be opened.
That's kind of where I'm thinking. However, McEwen currently has concrete barricades. So in an emergency, would the city come and remove them? What would that look like?
Yeah, if there's something that sort of instates an emergency, we can have a backhoe out there probably within a couple of hours to remove them and,
Okay.
basically set up a temporary road to either get emergency services into the site or get people out of the site. I mean, it'll be a pretty dramatic event to trigger that, but it is doable.
Okay, thank you. It seems to me we've got a massive problem with very little solutions, or the solutions we have are extremely costly. I'm curious about the McEwen route, and is there any precedent for going through an environmentally sensitive area? I just heard the mayor make a noise. I'm just asking questions. The road is there, or at least it's maybe not connected, but if you could just walk me through what that would look like. We have a potential road, but it's not in a great area.
I have to be honest, that goes beyond my scope of knowledge, so I don't know if Mr. Lindsay or Mr. Sims can speak to the process to actually build in that type of area. Happy to talk about how to build the road, just not the approval process to get
That's
that
fair.
done.
I think if we have McEwen going in, and then we have also a road coming up from Harewood Mines, I don't think they're connected, but it seems like the simplest, most direct route. But of course, we've got the environmentally sensitive area and the Harewood Plains there. So if I could just have some commentary on what that might look like, or if that is, we shouldn't even be discussing it, just give me a...
Chair, I'm looking at Mr. Lindsay to answer the question. I may have the
Get up.
history on that one, but what I understand is that particular property where it was intended to connect those two ends has got a covenant now due to the discovery of the endangered plant.
Okay.
So Mr. Lindsay may be able to speak to the
I think I would like
where we could get.
Yeah, I think I would like to know if, given that covenant, we shouldn't even be looking at McEwen as potential.
On?
Oh, you're
Thank
on.
you. Thank you, Madam Chair. If I understand the question, it's more about how do roads get built, or what are the possible mechanisms to require a road, and then what's the specific constraints for that site?
I don't think I'm asking so specifically. I'm saying we have a potential solution, but it's protected under a covenant. So does that mean that we should just take it right off the map and never discuss it again? Or do we keep it in the mix, but better understand what that means to punch a road through land that has a covenant on it?
Your Worship, I'm struggling, or sorry, Chair, I'm struggling a little bit with the answer because it's not a yes or no option, right? Because even though that specific property has a covenant, it doesn't necessarily preclude connecting those points in some other way. So I think it's worth exploring how those roads could be connected. Yes, the specific property that was to be connected is constrained, and the environmental covenant and the Lotus pinnatus, the official flower of the city, it's there and recorded, and yes, that is a significant issue, but it's not the only issue on that property, and there's significant topographical constraints of how you get up onto that property and how you would get down. So it might not be the best location, but I don't think, in my mind anyways, that precludes looking at some kind of connection overall in that area. And I think that goes back to what I understood the question was more about how do roads get built, and I think we primarily rely on developers to build our major roadways. So if there's development happening either in our lands or the lands outside the city, there's opportunity for roads to be constructed. In absence of a developer-driven process, then it would be inside the city, it's the city taking that on as a capital project, or outside the city, it's Ministry of Highways is the roads, even though the land use is regulated by the RDN. So, sorry, I'm not sure I've given you a straight answer on that.
No, I think there probably isn't a clear answer. We're just, we're looking at all options right now, and I'm just trying to understand the constraints of that particular one. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just can't help commenting that it seems to me during the past year, on 2 or 3 occasions, this council has, in the case of some residential development, decided to change, alter, lift, or do away with covenants. So I think your question is a valid one. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Councillor Thorpe. I appreciate that. Any other questions or comments? Or Mr. Sims, I see your hand there.
Thanks, Chair. one of the delegations mentioned or used the term, we need something shovel ready. And believe me, if staff had the solution, we'd get the diggers out there. Just tell me which direction you'd like to dig and how high and how deep and how long. And that's, I think it bears some more, Mr. Rose with his tongue in his cheek a little bit, but he's just sort of hated to say it needs a study. Now we're looking at something that's, that's appropriate to do to determine. We can't just say, well, find a solution and go, because it's fraught with pitfalls, I'm sorry to say. And the bill is going to be big. We need to step forward. Totally agree, totally support it. And that's really what the report was about, was this is how we could proceed. And if council so chooses, then what we can do is start to look at where would we fund that from, and when could we get to it. But as His Worship said, it is a frustration on not only certainly the neighborhood's part, but also on staff's part. It's a knotty problem. There's no doubt about it. This is 1,300 homes with a potential for another 600. It's not an insignificant neighborhood. It's a very desirable place to live. But there's pressures on the other 30,000 homes or properties throughout the cities as well. So it's just trying to juggle all of these challenges that are in front of us. And I think that's what Mr. Rose's last slide was, just trying to balance, the land use versus how much can we invest versus all of the issues that serving the existing community.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff, Mr. Parker made reference to a way of getting onto, I think I understood it correctly, getting onto the highway, but it involved a tunnel for the railways to go underneath, and I'm assuming the road over top. Was that actually south of where the parkway departs from the Trans-Canada Highway, or is it somewhere else? I seem to recall many, many years ago there was some discussion about that, but I don't know if that's the same one or not.
Through the chair, I think if I can elaborate on that, I believe what Mr. Park was referring to was an opportunity at the time to expand the underpass where the rail corridor currently exists so that it could preemptively be built to accommodate a road in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you, and I think I just missed that last piece. For the potential work with the South Nanaimo mobility, am I assuming then that you will be coming back with a business case, or what are the beginning steps here? Because I know that we're wanting action, not plans. On the other hand, I'm getting the sense we won't get action without planning.
Through the chair, so this report was for information and to provide information to council to gain a better understanding of what might be included or required to proceed forward with a study. So there is no recommendation. This is for information for council to provide guidance to staff on. So,
thank you.
Chair, and just through you, there was some discussion earlier today about next steps, and I believe Councillor Armstrong will be bringing forward a notice of motion. But this was to provide you all with some context, because coming forward to you will be information regarding the developments happening down there, the Sandstone development. So kind of to give you that whole concept and context so that you can then make a decision on how you would like staff to proceed.
Right. Thank you, Ms. Gurry. I have no more speakers on my list. Last call, Council. I see Councillor Bonner making a move there. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Chair. I'm guess I'm a little lost here. I'm looking at the.
Sorry, that was me.
I'm looking at the motion that we have here, and it specifically says the scope of work and possible funding options for a comprehensive Chase River and Cinnabar Valley mobility plan. Are we doing that?
Chair, as Ms. Gurry said, I think the intent here was to provide the context in a fairly short turnaround time in the context of Sandstone coming forward this fall. I think the next steps going forward in the next few months would be to provide further funding sources around where we could proceed with a study. Right now, as you know, we're well into budget cycle. We didn't want to disrupt that too much, but still wanted to provide this context. Mr. Rose has provided an estimate of the value of undertaking a mobility study. And in the next few weeks, we can come back again, or months, I should say, we should come back again with some more detail around it, depending on how things progress around the land use discussion.
So is it safe to say then that we haven't really finalized this motion yet?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Council, any further questions? Okay, then we are on to question. Oh. Motion to adjourn. We have question periods. Good try. Okay, we have no questions. So motion to adjourn from Mayor Krogh, seconded by Councillor Martman. All those in favor? That passes. Thank you very much, everyone.